Okay, it's 6:30. I'm calling this meeting of the San Leandro City Council to order. Today is Monday, July 17th, 2023, and we are starting on time at 6:30. Thank you to everyone for showing up in a timely manner. Today we have a new Eagle Scout. All right. John Frederick Cook III is going to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Great job, Mr. Cook. At this point in time, we will take our announcement.
Mr. Mayor, we'll start with roll call.
Roll call would be fine.
Councilmember Aguilar.
Present.
Councilmember Baloo.
Present.
Councilmember Bowen.
Present.
Councilmember Reyes.
Present.
Councilmember Simon is absent. Vice Mayor Azevedo. Mayor Gonzalez.
Here.
Now we'll move on to my announcement.
Item number 2. Thank you.
Public comment will be taken from those participating in person first, then on Zoom. If you wish to speak during public comment and are attending the meeting in person, please fill out a speaker card and hand it to the city clerk. To participate in public comment via Zoom, when the item is called, use the raise your hand tool or press *9 if calling from a phone. Speakers will be asked to unmute and invited to speak. You will have 2 minutes to speak and a countdown timer will appear for your convenience. When the timer is up, you may complete your sentence, then the microphone will be muted. To avoid confusion, all hands raised outside of public comment periods will be lowered. Thank you.
Hey, item announcement on my end. Today, as we have been doing for several meetings now, we'll be moving our consent items to the third spot. Unless I see any disagreement from my council, seeing none, we will make that adjustment as we have been doing. That is consistent with the upcoming edits to our handbook. Secondly, we have an item 12 today. We have a public hearing, and that public hearing by the protocols laid out in our current handbook happened before item 7. So although it might seem a little confusing that we're taking item 12 before 7, that's per the protocol as stated in our council handbook. At this point in time, I'd like to do our recognition for our meeting. Making sure that phone's on do not disturb. Is it the right side? So at this point in time, Mr. Jones, want to come on up and celebrate with us a little bit? All right. Very good. Good to see you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Over here.
Thank you.
And so we've got Matt Jones. So many people know Matt from his travels around town. Thank you for being a display of courage continuously. So I'm going to read a bit of this proclamation and then pass the mic to you for a word or two, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got whereas. So this is the July 26, 2023. We're proclaiming it as National Disability Independence Day. So just some reminders. Whereas the National Disability Independence Day commemorates the signing of the Americans with Disability Act on July 26, 1990. And whereas the ADA protects people with disabilities from employment discrimination and provides them with equal access to goods and services and communications, and the act empowers people with disabilities to stand up for their rights. And whereas the ADA helped address common barriers that were faced by individuals with disabilities and promoted accessibility in various ways, including the widening of doorways, the expansion of bathrooms to provide wheelchair accessibility, the addition of braille signs, and the use of auditory traffic signals at crosswalks to help the visually impaired. And whereas we encourage community members, including those with disabilities, to acknowledge accessible businesses and organizations by using the hashtag Disability Independence Day on social media. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Juan Gonzalez III, Mayor of San Leandro, declare July 26, 2023 as National Disability Independence Day in the city of San Leandro and call upon residents. I call upon you and public institutions, private institutions, businesses, and schools to affirm the principles of equality and inclusion for persons with disabilities, and to celebrate the freedom the ADA inspires us with forward thinking and design and technology, and to bring forth the promise of hope and freedom that is envisioned by the passage of the ADA. Let's go make it real.
Thank you very much. How's everything going for you? Just want to say hello to you. And I have a second chance in my life and be the best I can be and do the right thing. And just want to say hello to everyone and wish you all the best. Thank you.
I want to leave this with me. Let's take a quick picture. Let's get a hold of this. Okay, so at this time, we will move in our agenda to item number 4. As there was no closed session today, we'll move to item number 5, City Manager and City Attorney reports.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, and members of the public. I just have a few quick reports today that I think are of community interest. The San Leandro Police Department has a couple of events in the month of August. The first is National Night Out. It is occurring on Tuesday, August 1st from 5:30 to 9 p.m. And nationwide, millions of neighbors take part in this annual community building campaign. It promotes police community partnerships and neighborhood camaraderie to make our neighborhoods safer and more caring places to live. And our officers will be out visiting all of those who are inviting them to their National Night Out parties. The second is the Police Department's United for Safety event. It will occur in front of the police department on Saturday, August 19th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The event is open to everyone. The community will have an opportunity to engage with members of the police department as well as other city, county departments, and there will be a hosted lunch and games for children of all ages. So please join us for this fun community event. And then I wanted to point out tonight, we have a heavy consent calendar and wanted to let the community know that the council has been working very hard on their priority of infrastructure. We have several very important projects that have already gone through committee, and we are trying to utilize our committees efficiently and have these projects well vetted ahead of coming to the full council for consideration. Tonight, you're gonna, if you're looking at the agenda, we have the Family Aquatic Center, some large investments and a complete renovation of that popular swim center, as well as some investment in future maintenance to keep that facility working well. The Lake Chabot Road upslope repairs are on there. We have an emergency repair for consideration to fix the slide portion of the road before the next winter storm. We also are awarding a construction contract for our All Abilities Memorial Park Improvement Project. It'll be the first All Abilities park in San Leandro. And then last, but certainly not least, we have a contract for an architect who is coming in to design a new replacement library for the current Mulford Branch Library project. So very exciting, and that project is fully funded. And then lastly, on the Lake Chabot Road, I did want to just make a quick safety announcement to alleviate some concerns related to emergency response and evacuation access at Lake Chabot Road. It is currently closed and undergoing emergency hillside repairs, as I mentioned earlier. And in working with our public safety personnel, we are we're keeping it closed, but the barricades and fencing do provide, in the event of an emergency, both police and fire departments have access to open the gates at both ends of Lake Chabot Road at Astor Drive and at Lake Chabot Terrace. We also encourage residents to sign up for AC Alert, which is the mass notification system used by the city and county agencies throughout Alameda County to rapidly disseminate emergency alerts to people who live, work, and visit our county. So thank you. That's the end of my report.
At this point in time, I will be taking the consent calendar. I should have taken that right before your report, but so be it. At this point, we'll take that consent calendar, and I've got Councilmember Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez. Are we talking about announcements?
So item number 10, consent calendar, I had meant to take earlier. I had said that I would take it in slot number 3. I didn't, as it was not written in my agenda as such. I'm going to go ahead and take it right here. So we'll do the consent calendar if there's any items that people would like to pull. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion. I will come back to your announcements at item number 7, which will be after item number 6, public comment. So right now I am just after the public hearing. Fair enough. Fair enough. But right now, I just want to do the consent calendar.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Aguilar, please, or Councilmember Reyes.
Thank you. 10K for a very short discussion, I hope.
10K. Any other items? Councilmember Aguilar, please.
I would like to move the consent calendar with the exception of 10K.
And Councilmember Baloo, please.
Second it.
I've got a motion by Councilmember Aguilar, move the consent calendar with except for item 10K, which we will discuss. And I've got a second from Councilmember Baloo. At this point in time, I will take public comment on the consent calendar.
Chris Bammer. And then Tonde Smith, you may come up, get ready to speak next. Because there is lots of public comment for this evening, I will call people up in pairs.
I get a timer?
Ready?
I'm ready. So is anybody else confused with the way the agenda is being handled today? Thank you. Me too. Normal, happens every time. I've seen Douglas Spalding speak at least a dozen times on the Pledge of Allegiance, and I was denied that opportunity today. So when did we change that rule? I'd like to know. Douglas Spalding used to read a land acknowledgement. He wanted the city to adopt that, which the San Lorenzo School District reads every meeting. He just gave up. That's what you guys want. You want the public to just give up. It's ridiculous. So what's going on with the railroad tracks? I thought we were going to be doing some construction with the railroad tracks here. I saw all kinds of notices. The Washington overpass. The fence I was talking about is on the other side.
Mr. Member, just hold on a second. So is this?
So are you going to stop my time?
Yes, we'll stop your time. We'll give you extra time. So just to be really clear, is this related to a specific consent
I'm sorry.
calendar item?
I was confused. Let me go to the consent calendar. I thought this was public comments because that's usually before the
No.
consent calendar. So let me start over.
No.
Can I get my time redone?
Tell me when you're ready to.
I have 6 items. I want to speak on
Mr.
10B, 10C, 10I, 10K, 10M, and 10S. Do I get 2 minutes per or just 2 minutes for all 6?
Mr. Bammer, we're following the same protocol that we followed at all meetings. You've been given the opportunity to send us emails. You've been given the opportunity.
I don't sit behind a computer all day. I cannot write emails.
Mr. Bammer, you've been given the opportunity to send us handwritten.
Is the sergeant at arms ready? Because it's about to get real fun in here.
Mr. Bammer, you've been given multiple opportunities. At this particular time in our meeting, you're given 2 minutes to talk about item 10. So you have 2 minutes to speak about item 10, in addition to all the other avenues that you've been given to provide us your input.
My time going to start over, or do I get 1.6, 1 minute and 6
We're going to
seconds?
give you 2 minutes, Mr. Bammer.
I'm ready whenever you are. So consent item 10B, Memorial Park, 4.2 million and over $1 million in change orders. How much of that money came from Thrasher Park and the grant that we got for Thrasher Park on the end of the last council? I brought it up before. Brian, you're part of the parks, the facilities. You were there at Thrasher Park. We talked about it. I'd like to know what's going on. I looked up appropriating money for the pool. I wasn't too sure what appropriating mean because I'm not very educated. So I looked up the word. Take something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. Sounds about right. Is this money going to fix the pool? Or are we putting this money in the general fund to spend on Memorial Park? I'm trying to figure it out. Let me see here. The Mulford Library, waste of money. That's the joke. The handbook. Why don't we just put the consent calendar number 2? Right? I think that would be much better, being that you want to get the public out of here and we don't want us to speak. The minutes from July 10th, the map and the lease for 3199 Alvarado. Mr. Mayor, you said you were going to make sure there was a map with an outline specifically pointing out what area we're talking about. Well, as of about 5 o'clock, when I looked on the website and I clicked on the legislative details, I don't see a map and I don't see a copy of the lease. I'd like to see what kind of tax break they're getting on 15 acres for us to use 1.9 acres. And I'm curious, is that the sliver of land that used to have the railroad tracks that was piled up with garbage for the last 5 years? Because it's nice and clean now, and it looks like a private driveway right into your yard coming out on Alvarado right there, right behind Dick's. Is that what we're talking about? The wireless pole attachments. What's going to happen when these business goes out of when they go out of business and we have all these attachments on the poles, just like the wireless that they put on the houses a few years ago?
Thank you. Tonde Smith, and then Kat Wellman.
Just to be clear, so that there's no confusion, this is not general public comment, but specifically comment on the consent calendar.
Lake Chabot Road is on consent.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. We've been a part of this coalition to save Lake Chabot Road, and I was a strong advocate for the cause and did a lot of work to try to make sure that that happened. So when I started walking down on Lake Chabot Road after it was closed with my dog, I said, "This is really kind of cool that it's no cars here." But and as much as I like that, I recognize that we have a precarious position when it comes to emergency activity. And I live facing that hill, and it's a dry, big fire pit, really. And I'm afraid that when fires come roaring, or I don't want the fires to come, of course, but if they do, I want as much emergency personnel as possible to get there as quickly and as unencumbered by anything. So somebody read in the paper this week, that we want to have our cake and eat it too. Well, we don't really want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to be safe, and we want drivers to be able to get into the gym, and for emergency people to be able to get to that area. So it's not really having our cake and eat it too. We just really, truly do want to be safe. So we do want that road to be open. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat Wellman, and then Ann Kaywood.
I'm the president of the Bayo Vista Improvement Association. Bayo Vista has over 900 homes. Most residents want Lake Chabot Road to be permanently repaired and reopened temporarily to allow alternating one-way traffic prior to the permanent repair, which may take several years. Any closure of Lake Chabot Road is detrimental for 3 reasons. 1, it creates a serious public safety risk. Bayo Vista residents need as many exits as possible in the event of an emergency evacuation. There are really only 3 major ways to leave our neighborhood, and one of them is Lake Chabot Road. Many of our homes, particularly those on or near Lake Chabot Road, are in a high and very high fire danger area. We need the road available to both residents who may need to flee, as well as to emergency vehicles who need quick access to get there without having to move fences. 2, it creates a medical safety risk. There are many residents who live on or near Astor Drive. Currently, if there is a medical emergency at the swim club or at a residence near Astor Drive, the fire department and ambulances will have to drive up steep hills in Bayo Vista to get there, rather than being able to quickly drive up Lake Chabot Road. This extra time may be critical in trying to save a life. 3, diverted traffic is making Bayo Vista neighborhoods more unsafe. Traffic is now diverted into Bayo Vista neighborhoods, both from Astor Drive and from Benedict and Estadio. There are more cars and trucks coming into the neighborhood. Speeding is common. Our hills are very steep and dangerous, and it impacts the safety of far too many residents. We understand the safety concerns of those who live on Lake Chabot Road and want it to remain closed. However, there are many measures that can be made to slow down vehicles and make the road much safer. Because of the serious public safety, medical emergency, and high fire risk in Bayo Vista, the road needs to be opened as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and please vote yes on the resolution.
Thank you. Ann Kaywood and then Tim Ballas.
Good evening. My name is Ann Kaywood, and I'm a resident of the Bayo Vista neighborhood. At the July 5th meeting with the San Leandro Facilities and Transportation Committee, several concerns about wildfire risks were raised, supporting the need to repair and reopen Lake Chabot Road. Since that meeting, I did some additional research and located the CAL FIRE map, which clearly shows that CAL FIRE has classified the Bayo Vista neighborhood in high and very high fire hazard severity zones. We continue to have serious concerns related to the fire response access and resident evacuation for our community. The Bayo Vista neighborhood is not a small group of residents. It consists of more than 900 homes. Permanently shutting down Lake Chabot Road in San Leandro would significantly hamper effective response of emergency personnel to access portions of the Bayo Vista neighborhood and the surrounding wildland areas. The closure will also dangerously constrict an evacuation options of residents to safely flee from fire danger. As we have seen in many other fires in California, minutes matter. The fast-moving grass fire at Lake Chabot Park from firework embers on July 4th was the most recent example of the dangers we may experience. There are funding grants available from county, state, and federal wildfire and transportation agencies. We need to explore these options now, and we urge the city to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Ballas.
Good evening. Thank you for the time. My name is Tim Ballas. I'm a resident of Bayo Vista, San Leandro resident for 25 years. I would like to just take 5 seconds to say thank you for the prioritization of the paving that's happening in the city, downtown and the major arteries. It makes a big difference. And I know you all have an influence on the prioritization of public works. So thank you for that. I do support the resolution on Lake Chabot Road and the upslope repair. I am also a fan of competitive bidding, so I prefer not to see something get fast tracked through just because there's not available contractors. If that's the case, then I'd like to hear that. But I do support competitive bidding. I do support the resolution of the repair and like to see the repair made as soon as possible. Eventually, want the road reopened and to get all those repairs completed. I do want to make a few comments about overall planning when it comes to neighborhoods like Bayo Vista. It's a thoughtful, years-long process that goes into city planning, and diversion or change of use to city streets just because there's a temporary condition is really inappropriate, and in this case, dangerous. Those streets were designed and are designed for slow moving traffic, infrequent traffic, not frequent traffic. It's day-to-day, in and out of residents, and as has been stated here, for emergency access. I'm quite certain the Bayo Vista Development Agreement, when it was first constructed, includes a provision for the reliance of Lake Chabot Road for in and out access for emergency purposes. Those streets are designed for slow moving and infrequent traffic, and that's not what we have right now. It's actually dangerous. I live on Longview Drive. I witness it every day. The ride here tonight, I actually was almost hit. So thanks for the time.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, there's no more public comment or consent in person. We will move to Zoom. Susan Erb, you may unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm requesting that item 10I, resolution 23-332, be pulled from the consent calendar.
You're actually cutting out. We can't hear you. So I'm going to call on somebody else and we'll come back to you just to see if it's the system or if it's your connection.
Thank you.
Sarah Bailey, you may unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name's Sarah Bailey and I live in District 5. Thank you for letting me speak and ask you to grant engineering and transportation's request for.
I'm going to interrupt you too. We can't hear. Your connection is cutting out, so I think it might be our connection.
Probably.
We're going to have IT look into it. And then let me try one more person.
We can.
Douglas Spalding, you may unmute yourself.
How about me? Can you hear me?
No, we cannot hear you. It's cutting out.
Oh, well, you can hear me, just not very well.
We can hear about every 2 words.
Okay. Then. I will.
Mr. Spalding, I'm going to remove your permission to speak because we can't hear you.
We have any other comment cards on consent?
We do not.
So at this point in time, I'll close the consent, public comment for consent, and I will bring it back to council member discussion, if any. If there's any adjustments to the motion, amendments to the motion that's on the floor. And if there's not, we'll take a vote. Seeing none, please vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 601 with Councilmember Simon absent.
So then if we could just take up item 10K, please.
Yes, so item 10K, what I wanted to revisit briefly was the vice mayor selection process. So last meeting, we talked about how in committee I had suggested that the vice mayor be selected so that the vice mayor would not hold that title for an election to San Leandro City Council. And the intention behind that revision to the handbook was to take out the political question of who would be vice mayor, because there have been several times, where we've evoked that rule. I would be remiss not to bring up now, though, that there's an alternative that has been suggested to me, which is that we make appointments, like predictable appointments on a rotating basis, like some boards do, so that it's random and not based off of a vote. So like 1 year would be the District 1 representative, then District 2, then District 3, and District 4. So before we passed the handbook, I wanted to suggest that as an alternative. I think it accomplishes the same goal of removing politics from the equation and setting a standard in the handbook that we could follow. I feel a little silly because I actually don't have a preference, but since that idea was suggested to me, I wanted to bring it up in case there was discussion and in case the will of the council was to do that instead.
And to clarify, would you be happy to adopt the handbook with a commitment to revisit that particular piece in rules in the fall when we come back together?
Well, sure. If we don't want to have the discussion, if we don't want to have the discussion now, we could adopt the handbook, but I'm not sure what that would do to our process. Would we be able to adopt the handbook with the exception to the vice mayor, or would that cause, I guess this is a question for the city manager, would that cause more difficulty from an administrative perspective?
Yeah, so I think that where we stand is that we could accept it as is. We could spend time discussing alternative possibilities, take public comment on various scenarios, or we could go back to rules and consider various alternatives, because I've heard multiple options on how we might depoliticize that by having a process that's written. I think the original concern, if I remember correctly, was we had an unwritten process.
Yeah.
It created perhaps some misunderstandings and frustrations. So that's,
You know, I, is that,
sorry.
I, I don't know if it has to, if it needs to go back to rules or if it's something that we could just consider here. I guess I want to hear from other folks, whether they want to discuss it tonight or delay it.
Let me just check. Councilmember Baloo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for bringing up the question, Councilmember Reyes. I think the only thing I would offer to this is in the past, there have been times where the mayor was intentional about the vote, knowing that the mayor had either scheduling issues, vacation issues, et cetera, and wanted to make sure that the person who held the vice mayor position would be able to in fact stand in. And there were some former council members who made it clear that because of one thing or another, they couldn't commit to standing in for the mayor when the mayor was going to be gone for a month at a time or weeks at a time, et cetera. So the going down the list may serve I love taking the political out of it, but it may undermine the intent of having the vice mayor be able to stand in for the mayor when the mayor can't make it. I don't know your calendar, but I just would offer that for consideration to my colleagues to see if that's something that causes us to think we need to go one direction or another direction. I have no preference in the issue. Thank you.
Member Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez. We do support what my council colleague Reyes is talking about, but I also do want to bring up the transportation aspect of reimbursement. I know that some of us don't always fly to places. I know that I've driven most of the time, but I usually don't ask for reimbursement. But I think in that sense, they're in respect of my colleagues who do travel, who don't like to fly, who'd rather drive, that we compensate for mileage according to the max, the cheapest plane ticket. And so that is something that I'd like to also bring up and discuss and add to our handbook, is to compensate those who don't want to fly, who would rather drive to Reno, or I think it's limited to the Bay Area, but there are lots of conferences throughout the state and outside of the state. So I'd like to make that clear, but to set a limit as to what we can compensate for mileage.
Councilmember Bowen.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the question is the timeliness of it as well. I appreciate Councilmember Baloo's point. I think that if we do a rotation with the idea that, let's say I'm working a full-time job, I can't really commit to being able to stand in for you, for example, that I would just pass on that year. So I don't know if there are a lot of little nuances that we would really need to talk through. So maybe it would make sense to just modify those pieces of the handbook later so that we can really think through what this would look like. And I think that makes sense with transportation as well, making sure that, when we do go to Sacramento and we're driving, that we can be reimbursed for that. But again, I don't know if we need to go into the weeds with the handbook here, considering all that we have on our plate tonight.
So not seeing any other questions or comments, I'll just offer my thoughts, which is, I think these are both valid points and things that we should consider. My personal preference would be to just consider them in rules. We could say that we'll do it in September, October, November. We can come back. It is my understanding that we are currently reimbursing reasonable travel. So if people travel to Sacramento, that they are being reimbursed. And I think there's reimbursement up to maybe $125 per month. So the opportunity is there, but I think that we can tighten up the language. So that opportunity, I think, would be well afforded. So that would be my personal preference. So I'm going to take the liberty to just say I would move that we adopt item 10K as is, with a commitment or a direction to staff that they put it on rules so that we can revisit the 2 points that have been raised at today's meeting. Councilmember Reyes, please.
Can I just clarify? I don't think it should be a priority on our committee in Rules Committee. I'm happy passing it as is tonight. And I think, we should discuss it in the future if there's a will on the council to do so, but that it not be prioritized above the other things that we have to handle in rules.
So is that a second?
Yes, it is.
Got a motion to adopt 10K with guidance to council as discussed here in chambers, moved by the mayor and seconded by Councilmember Reynes. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. I'm sorry, there should be public comment. Have any cards been submitted on 10K?
Yes, Chris Bammer.
Mr. Bammer, please.
And IT is working on the Zoom public comment issue. So at this time, we still cannot take public comment online, but we will take it in person. Okay,
Can I ask some clarifying questions before you start my time?
Mr. Mayor.
So
Let's see what your question.
I was told that I can't speak, I can speak on the consent calendar as a whole. But you took action on all of the items on the consent calendar. So I should be able to speak on every item that you took action on, correct or no?
So we have voted on the consent calendar except for item K. The entire consent calendar except for item K has been approved, adopted by the council. So the remaining question on the table is item 10K. You have a motion on the floor to vote to move that item also. So this is your opportunity. If you have a disagreement on what the council is doing on item 10K, offer your thoughts on item 10.
Is it question and answer, or is it me talking like I'm speaking a different language and you just stare at me?
So the format, well, I hope it's not scary. The format of this is where you offer your comments, and historically we haven't offered a lot of direct reaction, but there's been a lot of discussion with people that are even in this room. I have taken some notes because I will be offering some reaction to some of the things that have been said. But at this point in time, you've got the opportunity to address the council on item 10K.
Okay, you can start my time. It won't take very long. Like I said before, you should probably put the consent calendar at like number 2, number 3. I'd like to see public comments before the consent calendar. So whatever you put the consent calendar, put public comments before that. I could come in and speak at public comments and get all my comments done in 3 minutes for everything on the agenda. But, I've seen that this is like the 3rd time they've changed the handbook in the past 2 years to accommodate the council and alienate the public.
Thank you. There's no further public comment in person, and we still do not have a resolution to Zoom.
At this point in time, I'll close public comment on the item. There is a motion on the floor, looking by council members to see if there's any desire for further discussion. Seeing none, let's vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 601 with Councilmember Simon absent.
So for the purpose of clarity, at this point in time, we have gone through items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have also taken our consent calendar and the items pulled from consent calendar. We will continue on our agenda with general public comment. And so to be very clear, this is public comment on items that are not on our agenda. We speak on agenda items. We hear from the public on agenda items at the time that we reach that item on the agenda. So this is for items that are not on our agenda.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, it looks like I have 2 public comments for this. Peter Van Osting and then Tuan. So Peter, you may come up.
Thank you. Good
Oh,
evening,
hold on one
City
second.
Council members.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council members. My name is Peter Van Osting. I'm a resident of Lake Chabot Road. I do have public comment about the future repairs, not something that's on the consent calendar that you just approved of. But I do have concerns about the cost of the repairs beyond what has already been approved. Because what's been approved is the upslope repair and then the planning for the rest. And that's a fraction of the cost of what the whole thing's going to take to reopen the road to cars. And I think that the context of the city looking at a possible new tax for infrastructure is important. If the city really is in a situation where it can't meet its obligations and needs a new tax, then I think the sort of the single-minded, we need to reopen Lake Chabot Road to cars should be rethought. And I do think that the fire risk that's been talked about several times, I'd like to address that. Obviously, a fire is a scary situation. Obviously, everybody wants to be safe. And I think that that's an important thing to consider. But to say that this stretch of Lake Chabot Road, which is a winding road that leads up into the woods, is an unchangeable and essential part of the evacuation, I just think I'm not convinced of that. There are other alternatives, and I think that they should be considered. And obviously, there are other infrastructure projects that I think should be prioritized, especially given that the residents of Bay Vista are very much split about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Juwan?
I like to just ask that whenever you craft and pass policy to do genuine outreach to stakeholders, your policies that you consider and pass have tremendous impact on residents and their lives and their families. It takes an extraordinary amount of time for the public to provide outreach to you. And whenever we ask for a meeting, please sit down with us so that we could explain policy impact to you. A lot of policy that's passed is based on emotional arguments that is not backed up by facts. For example, people said that, housing was causing homelessness, and during the eviction moratorium for 3+ years, there was this explosion of tent cities everywhere in Oakland, and people weren't being pushed out into the street, and they totally ignored the pandemic of fentanyl and drug abuse that led to a lot of overdose deaths that was never addressed, never an emergency moratorium or declaration of any kind for fentanyl abuse. That's just one example where you use it, the most vulnerable residents, homeless residents, to drive policy that harms the public good. More policy around housing is being considered, extremely harmful. I'd like to sit down with you and explain about the policy impacts. I have studied them. I'd like to present the other side. I would also like to ask for reimbursement for housing providers that still are out tens of thousands of dollars, for policy that was passed without the data that backed it up, for mom and pops that have no retirement, for people who cannot fill the prescription medication. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, we need to do one test to see if Zoom public comment is working.
Thank you.
IT, do you want me to call on somebody? Susan Erb, you may unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good evening. There needs to be an opportunity for community.
Sorry, Susan, I'm going to interrupt you. It's still cutting in and out. So I'm going to remove your permission to speak. And Mr. Mayor, I have one more public comment in person.
This continues public comment.
Chris Bammer?
Glad I showed up in person. I was expecting some technical difficulties today. It's happened to me many times when I speak on Zoom. Only reason we do these meetings on Zoom is because I requested it in the Rules Committee meeting years ago. The Pledge of Allegiance Douglas Spalding has spoke on the Pledge of Allegiance at least a dozen times over the past 2 years. He wants somebody to read a land acknowledgement. So now I can't speak on the Pledge of Allegiance. I want to know when that rule changed. We change the rules as we go. I've been trying to figure it out. And every time I think I get it figured out, you guys are updating the handbook, making changes. What's going on with the railroad tracks? I thought we were going to be doing some work on the railroad tracks. I was expecting all these road closures. The overpass on Washington, it doesn't seem like any work's getting done. Just a big cluster. The side of that I was complaining about that's been run into has been run into like 3 more times. It's about to fall on the freeway. I'll just tell you right now, it's going to happen. The tree at the bus stop on Llewellyn and Tropic, they came and cut half the tree down and ripped out half the sidewalk. Been like that for 2 months, right at a bus stop, right in front of low-income housing area. This is great for the city. It looks, my neighborhood looks good. The old Goodwill site. Why don't we just board up all the windows? I mean, I've been complaining about this site since Goodwill was still in business. The last time I complained about it, the very next day I drove by and I seen every department head standing out in the parking lot. So I stopped by to see what was going on. Not a whole lot, obviously. Parrott Street. I drove down Parrott Street on my way here tonight. Can we do something about the street? It looks horrible. Does it not matter anymore? Can we either repaint it or take it off? Because it looks bad and it looks like we don't care.
Thank you. George Wu?
Good evening, council members. Good evening, Mayor. First, I want to say if new policies are to be developed, all stakeholders must be involved. For the housing protection policies you want to discuss tonight, the voice of housing providers should be heard and considered. Second,
Mr. Wu, because we're talking about these regulations specifically with respect to housing providers and tenants' rights and the regulation of that market, it's not really an abstract discussion. Mr. Tuan walked that line because he didn't talk about housing policy in particular.
okay,
So if you're going to
not-
focus on housing policy, then I'll ask you to wait until that item.
Okay, I'm not talking about housing policy. I just
No
say
reference to landlords or tenants or anything related to housing.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Second, about 35% residents in San Leandro are Asian people. Most of them are the first generation immigrants. Usually, they are ignored out of public policy because they don't have good English. They hesitate to speak here. They work hard to save money and they invest money in housing for better support their families. In addition, they also sacrifice weekend time to maintain the rental business, doing the repair job by themselves. They treat. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I don't think the Zoom issue has been resolved yet.
And we have gone through all public comment for non-agenda items.
Correct.
Okay, then I will close public comment and we will move on to the item 7 that we had talked about earlier before. But before doing that, as promised, I have to take item 12 as a matter of council handbook. I think it's just city manager has reminded me, it's something that I have said before in these chambers. I'll repeat here. Our meetings are in-person meetings. We endeavor to provide online access as a courtesy. That is the stated position of the council. And so we endeavor, we've been pretty good at it. We're not perfect at it. And we will continue to work on improving it so that it's always working. But your best bet is to show up at council chambers If you can't show up in person, send us emails, call us, handwrite a letter and send it to us. I have scans of letters that come in. People communicate in lots of different ways, up to and including stopping me in the grocery store. So please feel free to communicate with us at will, but recognize that Zoom is just but one of the options that you have to communicate with us. At this point in time, I'd like to move for public hearing. So the short version of this is that we moved to, or we're seeking to adopt a resolution imposing the 2023 liens for non-payment of delinquent solid waste service charges, sidewalk repair charges, Cal EPA, CUPA, CUPA surcharge fees, building code violations and code compliance citation fees, water pollution control plant, commercial and industrial user and connection charges, and to adopt a resolution overruling protests related to non-payment of delinquent solid waste service charges, sidewalk repair charges, LEPA, CUPA surcharge fees, building code violation, compliance citation fees, water pollution control, commercial industrial user connection charges. That's a mouthful, but because it involves imposing liens, I want to be quite thorough. And we've got a staff presentation by Director Yuen from Finance.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you for holding a public hearing on the matter of liens that we seek approval to impose. This is for non-payment of delinquent accounts receivables related, as you just said, to building codes, community compliance, environmental service charges, sidewalk repairs, and sewer service charges. First, a little background on the collection practices employed by staff prior to seeking authorization or a lien on property owners for unpaid delinquent bills. First, the finance department sends out monthly bills, which are due 30 days from the invoice date. If these are unpaid, then past due notices are mailed and due within 10 days. Any continued unpaid accounts are mailed subsequent delinquent notices at the 60, 90, and 120 days past due marks. These same notices or lists of delinquent bills are also provided to respective city departments who may be engaged with the delinquent account holders. For instance, we may provide lists to engineering for some of their contractors to receive the message that there's a delinquent account. And then final notices are issued, and they include warning statements that failure to pay will result in a tax lien. On June 15th, a legal ad was placed in a local newspaper to notify affected parcel owners of the potential lien imposition and also this public hearing. And meanwhile, staff has continued to, up until today, work diligently with departments to get a final list of accounts to lien and also monitor the accounts while still working those accounts to try to continue collection efforts. On June 28th, staff sent a final bill to outstanding account holders with a 10-day notice of public hearing. And that brings us to this point tonight, where this public hearing is being held and we seek authorization to impose liens. Should that authorization be provided on August 8th, any outstanding unpaid accounts will be filed with Alameda County, who will levy charges on customers' tax rolls. These are the different types of delinquent accounts receivable this year. They include solid waste, which is basically collections that are handled by ACI, CUPA fees, which are surcharges for an environmental regulatory program of the state, code compliance, such as building code violations, code enforcement, such as citation fees, sidewalk repairs for work that the city has completed on the benefit of property owners, and commercial wastewater fees. Specifically, businesses are billed directly through the city and not through East Bay MUD. This here is a summary of historically the liens for these different categories that were imposed in prior years, as well as what's proposed this year. In the prior two fiscal years, you'll see that 2 years ago, 48 liens were imposed for $26,000. Last year, 67 liens for $80,000. And at the time that tonight's meeting agenda was published last week, the count was 131 liens for a total of $295,000. As I mentioned earlier, staff has continued collections efforts, and I'm pleased to report that as of today, these numbers have decreased to 98 accounts for a total unpaid total, of $131,000. So there has been a decrease from what was published. These charges are for recouping funds that the city has spent to provide public services. And the recommendation that staff seeks tonight is for you to adopt a resolution to impose liens for non-payments, as well as to adopt a resolution to overrule protests. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Just for the benefit of council, this was heard, discussed in finance already, and then brought forward to this council for your consideration. Are there any questions at this time? Councilmember Reyes.
Yeah, what was the disposition coming out of finance?
It was 3-0 to bring it to council.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, let's move to public comment on this item. So I will open the public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item?
Mr. Mayor, we have one public comment in person.
Please proceed.
So we've been talking about salary increases for council. In Oakland, the mayor of Oakland wants $75,000 increase in salary. She says she doesn't know anything about it, but it's in the news. But there's going to be a decision on whether 6 months into office she's going to get a 75,000 salary increase. And I know you guys make some change, 15,000, and you guys need a salary increase because there's inflation. And if you don't match inflation, your salary actually decreases each and every year. And some of the laws that's being proposed that's going to be put before you suggest to limit adjustments so that it's below inflation. So actually that value.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but how does this relate to the decision before us to impose liens?
Oh, sorry.
For people that have not paid?
Yes.
It related to that topic?
It is, sorry. I got a little side distracted. So I got side distracted. The city of Oakland a couple of weeks ago also looked at the master fee increase and whatnot that you guys are on the agenda.
Master fee will be the next agenda item. This is specifically liens. So you have commentary on liens that the council has asked by staff to impose.
No, I'll wait for the next.
No problem. Let's wait for the next item. Thank you. Other public comment on this item?
I'd like to ask why the city is so opaque, why there's no.
Sorry, have you filled out a speaker card?
No,
Please fill, it's okay.
I'm just frustrated with the city because it has.
At this point in time, I'm going to ask you politely. I'm being polite.
There was information that there was going to be that a housing work session on the 24th, and then it got moved to the 17th, and then now it's just a regular city council meeting. Why is the city not properly informing the public?
I'm going to ask you to wait. I'm going to ask you to wait. So first, why don't we take that offline? Because I don't think it's appropriate to speak on something unrelated to the agenda at that time. So just give it a moment. We are serving the people of San Leandro, and so we're here to work with you. Have you called my office directly already? Have you emailed my office? Have you emailed any of the council members? Have you called the council members? So we're here to work with you. We're here to work. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask you to step away from the mic because this is not public comment, just open-ended general public comment. Okay. So we will come to the housing item. We're coming to the housing item in a minute. So I'm again going to ask the clerk now to turn off the mic. Okay, and so then we're going to move on. So are there any other public comments on the question of whether this council should vote to impose liens on the properties of individuals who have not made the payments after all the efforts by staff to get them to make the payments. So, just to clarify for the public at this point in time, we have confirmed that our problem with the online connection, Zoom connection, is not something that will be resolved. So anybody who's out there who's hearing us that wants to come in, for instance, and speak about the housing item a little bit later, best wishes to get in your car and come on down here and join the conversation on housing a little bit later today. At this point in time, seeing no other public comment, I'll close the public comment on item, I'll close the public hearing on item, what was this, 12A, and see if there's any final questions, comments from my council. Seeing none, let's vote, please.
All votes are in. Motion passes 601 with Councilmember Simon absent.
So we have a second public hearing that we are to hold on, in this case, considering the adoption of a resolution approving amendments to the city master fee schedule for 2023, 2024. This is item 12B.
Okay, good evening again.
We'll prepare again, or you'll present again.
Good evening again, Mayor and council members. Thank you again for holding a public hearing, this time for updates to the master fee schedule for fiscal year 2023-24. A little background on the master fee schedule update. Fees and charges on the schedule are cost recovery fees and are charged to specific user groups who benefit from the services, such as users who sign up for recreation classes or facility rentals. In March of 2021, a little over 2 years ago, the Budget Task Force recommended an update to the fee schedule, a comprehensive update, as a comprehensive update by a third party had not been conducted since 2008. In December of 2022, staff engaged and contracted with a third-party consultant to commence this study. And initially, a target date of that fee study was set for spring of 2023. However, the fee study has proved to be much more complex than originally intended, and the target date has been pushed to the fall of 2023. Due to this, staff proceeded to update 3 taxes ahead of the fee study results, specifically the business license tax, the EMS tax, and the 911 tax was brought to this council on May 15th to be in compliance with the city's municipal code. Now we need to proceed and update other fees in order to meet the legal requirement deadlines of other governmental entities, such as wastewater fees, where we must inform the Alameda County Tax Assessor's Office of any updates by August 1st. So the proposed fees will have an effective date of September 1st. And there are set criteria for such fees, either consumer price index, which is 4.9%, construction cost index of a little over 1%. Prop 18 allows for increases up to 9.5%. And then, of course, overall costs, such as actual replacement costs, operating costs, and costs from contractual agreements that the city enters into. These are the proposed fees to be adjusted ahead of the fee study results. They will generate positive revenue while the fee study is in progress. You see legal services, cost recovery, impact fees, equipment rental, elimination of marina fees due to the marina being closed, environmental service fees, wastewater fees, and connection fees. So staff recommends that council approve amendments to certain fees that are in the master fee schedule as set forth in your agenda packet for these fees to be effective on September 1st. Thank you.
Council questions at this point in time? Okay. Do you recall, was this also a 3-0 vote coming out of finance?
Yes, Mayor, this was a 3-0 vote from Finance Committee.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions at this point in time, I'd like to open the public hearing on this item.
Mr. Mayor, there's no public comment.
We'll close the public hearing, move to council member. Oh, I'm sorry, that's right. You had, but you have a
apologize,
card
but-
up here? I'm sorry. You have a card?
Yes.
So,
Well,
so just to clarify, Madam Clerk, I think he had spoken under 12A, but it was really with respect to 12B, these fees in particular, and I had asked him to come back. Thank you. Proceed, please.
First of all,
And just
apologize.
one last thing, sorry for interrupting you. One of the things we'll try to do is continue that process of being transparent. I think I'm going to offer a little bit of commentary in a second because there's a number of questions that have been raised about process. This one, just because that timer says 5 minutes. There, for purposes of a public hearing, our current handbook lists the time as 5 minutes. And so that's why the clock says 5 minutes. Now, you don't need to take all 5 minutes if you don't have 5 minutes worth to say, but just be aware that's why it says 5 minutes. You may proceed.
I'll be brief since I got confused about item 12A and 12B. Sorry, I was in the middle of reading. But the master fee, there's an increase, and that reflects the adjustment for inflation and just normal costs that went up. And I think that seems to me to be fair, and that should be for council salary of a number of things. And I think that's also should be true for other areas of sectors of business, including housing providers. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any other comments on 12B?
Mr. Mayor, no, there's no further
And
comment.
I will close the public hearing on that item and turn to my counsel for any final questions, commentary, and I would entertain a motion. Councilmember Aguilar, please.
I'd like to move item 12B.
Vice Mayor Azevedo, please.
I'll second it.
Got a motion by Councilmember Aguilar and a second by Vice Mayor. Do I see any interest in further discussion? Seeing none, we move to a vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 601 with Councilmember Simon absent.
Thank you for your patience. With that, we will move to City Council and City Council calendar items and announcements. Councilmember Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mayor. On Wednesday, I will be attending the 6th LGBTQI Political Leaders Conference of the Americas and the Caribbean in Mexico City. This is completely paid for out of my own pocket. On July 20th through the 22nd in Mexico City. And so the whole purpose of this is there are participants from all over Latin America and the Caribbean who will come to the 6th edition of this conference to share ideas, exchanges, and best practices and lay the foundations to move towards equity in countries of their origin. And so out of over 550 applicants, I was one of 250 to get accepted to this, to participate in this conference in Mexico City. So I will be out of town Wednesday through Sunday.
Vice Mayor Azevedo, please.
Yes, I will be going to Vietnam for a week from July 29th to August 5th with the California delegation meeting the president and prime minister in Vietnam, and it's paid for through a nonprofit. I'll be representing the city.
Seeing no other announcements, I'll use this as the opportunity to quickly address just at a high level, a couple of comments or questions raised by the public. the objective is to make these meetings as welcoming and as accessible as possible. We do have process. We have process to keep order and help get things moved along. So for example, a question was raised about the July 10th meeting, and in particular that there was going to a commitment made to show a map on a lease for a strip of land. And the answer is yes. When the lease comes for the council to adopt and for the public to consider to comment on, there will be a map that outlines where that piece of land is, and the details of the lease will be available to the public. Similarly, there was a question about Lake Chabot Road, and in particular, timing and the bid process and all that kind of stuff. I think that just big picture, without discussing the item, it was discussed in facilities committee. It's this idea that to get things done before the winter rains requires a certain level of speed. We want to make sure that if we're going to execute and preserve assets, that we do so in a way that's conducive with how the weather will treat us. There was also a question or comment raised about the work session. To be clear, the work session on housing was not on the calendar, but we've talked about various possibilities. Also understand that this is only the beginning of that process, because we will be listening to a variety of stakeholders. We'll be engaging with the community at multiple levels. So there will be plenty of opportunities for people to share their thoughts. And I, again, encourage you, because many people do already email us, they call us, we speak with people, we meet with people. And so may I please, I gave you the courtesy, please give me the same courtesy. So when we interact with the public, we use all of those opportunities to take in information. It's really important that we hear all the perspectives. And so we thank you for engaging with us, and we encourage you to keep engaging with us. At this point in time, I'm going to move to the presentation that we have agendized on housing. That's item number 8A. And Director Tom Liao will be presenting this, perhaps with a support cast and crew.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening to the City Council. Good, let me pull up the presentation. Well, good evening. So tonight, here's a brief overview for the public. I'm going to talk briefly in a moment about how this item is and why it's presented tonight. We'll then go into some existing tenant housing protections that are in place both at the city and state level. And then I think a big question that's been asked for several months is what's the estimated number of rental units that could be impacted by a potential housing protection measure, such as rent stabilization, rent control. And then we'll look at other types of tenant protections that have been discussed throughout, particularly from some of the members here at council to explore. And then we'll go into the next steps and present that timeline for your suggestions and feedback. So at the City Council priority session earlier this year, housing and homelessness was one of the top 3 priorities. And efforts to enhance tenant protections were under the homeless prevention side of the housing and homeless priority. And so that's something I know that we had brought up as an exercise a few months ago related with the other housing related priorities. And tonight we're really, as the mayor had noted, kicking off this specific policy direction on housing protections and how to move forward with that. In the recently certified housing element that we had from the state and under the fair housing chapter, we've also been sort of tasked to explore enhancing tenant protections as well. And one of the more recent actions and public discussions has been related to the eviction moratorium, which was determined to sunset and voted on by you all to sunset on July 31st coming up of this year. Some existing protections overall from the state side. In 2019, there was the Tenant Protection Act, and this was a cap. This was basically a statewide rent control that has a sunset provision. It sunsets in 2030. I do want to clarify, we tried to keep these slides sort of simple in terms of text. I could expand it when it says does not apply in cities with rent control ordinances. I would be a little bit more specific to say that it would be superseded in cities where rent control is actually stricter than what is allowed under the state. So the state provision caps at 5% CPI for a 10% maximum. So if you're a city, and we'll be showing you shortly, some cities that have lower or more stringent rent control caps, those would be in effect and superseding the state provision. So the state also laid out some exemptions to the Tenant Protection Act 2019, and that would be for more recently built housing in the last 15 years. That includes accessory dwelling units, owner-occupied properties, including duplexes and single-family homes, and such as those that are owned by corporations or real estate trusts, and also longer-term restricted affordable housing. So we have many of those in this community that are city funded or state funded, and oftentimes owned and managed by nonprofit housing developers. We have a list of our existing city housing protection programs in place. Some have been here for a while. Again, we have a rent review board program that is different from rent control, of course, and that's been in place for almost 25 years. We contract with nonprofit providers to provide fair housing services for tenant landlord counseling. And more importantly, in recent years, the city council has budgeted for and expanded the next 2 years tenant legal assistance as well with Centro Legal de la Raza. In recent years, as a response to also tenant concerns and the shifting markets, so the rental markets, the city has amended the rent review ordinance, has also created and adopted tenant relocation ordinance in about 2017, and then adopted rent control for mobile home parks. In more recent years, the city council has tightened that for mobile home parks and created a mobile home park overlay zoning. And in addition, the city has also had its inclusionary zoning ordinance that requires a set aside by private developers of new housing to set aside at least 15% of their units, either for sale or rental for affordable housing. We, staff actually did look into our neighbors here throughout Alameda County. And so here I won't go through everyone, but providing you all a summary of which cities in Alameda County actually have a formal rent stabilization ordinance. So currently there appear to be 4 of them, and that would be Alameda, Berkeley, Hayward, and Oakland. But other cities also have other tenant protections, a variety of which are included here, such as related to anti-harassment or just cause or rent registry or rent review or tenant relocation. So this is a summary of our neighboring cities that have those. We also highlighted 3, and we're going to be going back as staff. I mean, we did this initial research, as you can see. There was a lot to look at, but I think we will be diving back and talking to certain cities. But we highlighted based on the different city sizes: Alameda, Hayward, and Oakland. And as you can see a little bit more detail with their programs, the number of units that fall under their rent stabilization ordinance, the amount of staffing and operating budget they have. So obviously Oakland, as the biggest city here in this table, has 26 staff and almost over $9 million budget. Although interestingly, the city of Alameda has less units, but actually more full-time staff working on their rent stabilization ordinance than, say, Hayward, which is bigger. Most cities have a sort of a range of a cap of anywhere from 3 to 5% or a percentage of CPI in these examples. These cities also have a per unit fee that they charge for administering these programs. They also are allowed to, or the housing providers are allowed to pass 50% of that fee on to the tenants. And then there's varying enforcement mechanisms that you see as well that each of these cities kind of implements. Now, some cities like Hayward and Alameda encourage a kind of a rent mediation, rent sort of resolution first before they go into a formal arbitration if needed. Oakland, I think, has a board, a rent adjustment board that actually will adjudicate rent increase issues. Oakland also is quite extensive in tracking certain trends, such as Ellis Act evictions, owner move-in evictions as well. And I think part of that may be because of their staffing ability. I think this was the big question that we heard as we were given direction to come back with this item. is to, again, I look at the total units that could fall under a city rent stabilization ordinance and factoring in Costa-Hawkins and, other laws. And so overall, the city with ownership and rental, we have about 32,000 housing units citywide. I think we tried to extract which ones are renter occupied. And again, I would look at this as ballpark because similar to eviction moratorium, we have to piece together some county data and city GIS data. So this is not exactly, there's no sort of perfect number that we were able to find for this, but we were able to sort of piece this together. So to give you a sense, overall, I think the estimate is over 6,000 units would immediately fall under any potential rent stabilization ordinance that were to be adopted. We factored and eliminated that, as you know, with Costa-Hawkins, you cannot consider single family and ownership townhomes and condos. So that's about 7,700. And then we also eliminated the 1,800 or so affordable housing units that have long-term restrictions on them. But we've added in mobile home park units as well, because we actually want to integrate that potentially if exploring this into a citywide ordinance. So of course, the known law of Costa-Hawkins, this is, I think at this point, most renters and housing providers know this law, and so wanted to kind of highlight some of the key features. I think any city undertaking rent stabilization has to factor this state law in. So it basically affects cities' abilities to regulate rents, particularly for things built after 1995. And so units, one thing to keep in mind is that we have an existing housing inventory of entitled projects, many of which are rental from the last few years, probably close to 2,000. So again, under this standard, they would not be subject to any potential future rent stabilization ordinance. So the other thing is that, again, that the Costa-Hawkins exempts ownership units, particularly single family condos and townhomes. It also, when it was adopted, prohibits vacancy control. So prior to that, there were some cities that had your ability to, for either housing providers or for renters protections, control the rents for future when a unit becomes vacant. You could actually you could cap the rent for the next renter. That was prohibited under Costa-Hawkins. But now Costa-Hawkins does not prevent cities, though, from passing just cause, adopting rent registry, doing a rent review, or passing tenant relocation ordinances. So those, and of course, we have a couple of those. So those are not prohibited under Costa-Hawkins. And just the next few slides will just summarize some of these topical issues of housing protections that have been brought up by some of you during the course of the prioritization and prior public meetings. So currently the city does not have a just cause ordinance. And some of the summary here of the details of what that constitutes is actually under the AB 1482. But in essence, a just cause ordinance prevents a landlord or a housing provider from evicting a tenant without just cause. And that would be a just cause might be unpaid rent, violating substantive lease terms. And so there are exemptions to this, again, under the AB 1482, and that would be owner-occupied single-family residences, duplexes, recently built housing in the last 15 years, and ADUs, and then long-term affordable housing units as well. So another area that you all have brought up too, some of you have brought up for consideration, for exploration, is rent registry. And that is basically when localities will require property or a housing provider to register their rental units operated within the city limits, and providing info about the unit, the rental rates, the unit types, the program administration fee amounts. Part of it is to monitor the sort of compliance with the rent stabilization ordinance. Another one too that staff had sort of brought up because of a recent trend is tenant anti-harassment. And that seems to be a newer trend among some cities. I'd say I've seen about maybe half dozen or so we've seen about. We do not have that currently, but part of that is obviously more directed towards if there's prohibiting property owners or managers from harassing tenants or pressuring, intimidating, or using fraud to force tenants to vacate their units. And some cities, again, I think Los Angeles and Los Angeles County, I want to say here in Richmond and some other cities as well, have Oakland, have those adopted. And again, this is something that seems to be more fairly recent. In terms of next steps, we are here to kind of outline just a process. And I would emphasize what Mayor Gonzalez had said, that this is the beginning of a process. And given sort of tenant policy or housing protection debates in recent years, we know that there'll be multiple parties and stakeholders to speak to. So staff is proposing through the summer and fall of beginning that initial public outreach process to talk to both tenant and housing provider stakeholders, including associations, organizations on both sides, and holding some of those meetings to get feedback, initial feedback, before we kind of craft that sort of specific ordinance. But we'll still of course be doing research. We're proposing to come forward to present those policy components of a draft to the Rules Committee, which is fairly typical for a higher standard policy like this. Coming back then to do, I know there was discussion of a work session, coming back in the spring, early next year or so, to the City Council with, again, inviting public discussion on those components after they've been refined after the rules, and then looking to potentially bring that first reading to you all in the spring, and then having it finalized in sometime in the summer of next year. So those are some thoughts. Again, one thing to remember too is that we are also going to look at factors including integrating the existing mobile home park ordinance into one citywide, if that's the direction, because it would be make more sense to administer one program, not have multiple ones out there. So just from staff's perspective, we just wanted to get council guidance on whether or not this direction is appropriate, whether some of these protections that we've kind of summarized based on feedback from you all are ones that you want us to also pursue. And if they're, in addition to, I mentioned, we are aware of some of the housing provider and tenant groups and tenants as well, and doing that outreach and getting that important feedback throughout. But if there's any specific groups that you all feel you definitely want us to target, or you think we may not have covered, staff, of course, would be happy to hear that as well. And I know we'll look forward to the public input. So before I hand it over and ask for questions, I do actually want to introduce a new staff member to our San Leandro team. So I have Carrie Husler here, and she's our housing manager. She just started last month. So Carrie has over 15 years of affordable housing experience, but we're fortunate that she's come over from the city of Cupertino. She's been the housing manager there for the last 6 years. So again, just wanted to welcome her aboard. And so you'll probably be seeing more of Carrie, and she'll be part of this process. So with that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I know that we've got a fair amount of public comment. So what I'd like to do is turn to my council member colleagues and see if they've got clarifying questions about what was presented. And then after we take the public comment, we can engage in a more wholesome, I'll call it discussion about the various issues and things that we want to consider so that we can provide guidance. So at this point in time, I will turn to Councilmember Aguilar for questions, please.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez, and thank you, Tom, for this presentation. I know this is a huge undertaking, and we're barely beginning the process, and I'm looking for feedback. I think there are some folks that were confused whether or not the dates of this actual process. So I'm glad we were able to solidify. But I think we need to advertise this more to get more stakeholders involved and to get more feedback for our meetings. Carrie, welcome aboard. So glad that you're here. Can't wait to work with you. I think with regards to suggestions, I think staff should move forward with regards to
just
an annual.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we focus on questions right now and then just like hear from all of our public and then give our suggestions?
Yes.
Are you fine with that?
Yes, I am leading to that.
Oh, questions? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. So with regards to just cause, I think that's something that is needed here in San Leandro. you indicated that there are other cities that have that. What are the legalities with regards to just cause?
Assistant City Attorney.
So at this point in time, is there a specific area that you would like city attorney to focus on, or to give us just some general legal background on just cause?
Just an overview so that we're aware and folks understand just cause. And I'm support and advocate for just cause. I just want to have that put out so that folks understand what that is.
So a just cause ordinance means that a tenant cannot be evicted unless there is just cause for the eviction. That's generally what's understood to be. AB 1482 that Tom mentioned sets some basic just cause requirements in the state, but those are sort of a floor, for lack of a better word. And the law does say that cities and counties can adopt stricter just cause requirements that have additional restrictions on evictions in those, and some cities do. You're limited still to, there are other provisions in state law like the Ellis Act that require, that give property owners the right to, for example, take property off the rental market. A just cause ordinance couldn't interfere with that, but in general, the city would have some flexibility to decide restrictions.
Thank you for that. And Tom, what you had indicated that there are other cities that have staff. And depending on how we craft our rent stabilization, what do you anticipate staffing to be? Hiring staff, I think that's something I know with the amount of units that we're able to or control in that sense, for folks that do business in San Leandro with the rentals. What do you anticipate that looking like, and a particular budget? I know that's something that you are also thinking about, but what do we kind of foresee with that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Aguilar. That's a good question. And I think I did want to go back. I know on that slide with the next steps, there is a caveat there that we did not exclude on the timeline part of it. I mean, but we'll be doing concurrently when we bring the policy forward, is the implementation and administration of a program if it were to go forward, and so again, I think as we interviewed or talked to the different cities that we highlighted, and we saw all the Alameda County cities, I think it shows you how varied some of the programs are. And certainly there's 4 that have it, and the others don't, but they have varying degrees of tenant protections. So I think part of our dive will be to go back and choose probably a handful of those cities, including the 3 that we highlighted, to get a really a better sense in terms of administration of kind of like pros and cons, how it's working, what's working, things like that. So I'm sorry, at this point, I couldn't tell you what that number is, but I think that, again, I would say that just emphasize that as we bring back a policy for you all potentially to consider and the public, we would also concurrently be trying to address that question of the administration of such a program to ensure its effectiveness.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you for those questions. Councilmember Baloo, your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome aboard, Carrie. Thank you, Tom. Your usual good job. I know we're in the early phases, but I appreciate getting the overview. Can you go to slide 8 for me for a second, please? Slide 8, you come down to, and again, you come down to the fact that it's about 6,319 rental units that we would be legislating for. And my question is, and I don't know if you know the answer, because I know how challenging it is to get to the bottom of all this. Does that number include Lakeside Village, which is state controlled?
No, so just for reference for the public, Lakeside Village is probably the largest apartment complex in the city. It's 840 units. That is actually under the 1,800 there that's subtracted out because it's actually state, it's a state funded, it got low income housing tax credits through a private developer and private owner. So the city did not put any money in it. They chose not to go that route, the developer. So, and so it's privately owned, but it's 100% affordable.
Thank you. And my second and final question, Mr. Mayor, for Tom. Does that number include the 1,421 Section 8 apartments? It might be a little less because some of the Section 8 might be condos, but does it include the 1,421 Section 8 vouchers and certificates that are awarded in San Leandro by the Housing Authority of Alameda County?
I don't know if it factors that part in. Again, that's why this number is a ballpark. I don't know, Alex, if you want to add, I mean, whether that, I would suspect that those are longer term affordable units.
Those aren't considered, at least for the purposes of Pasahawk and rent deed restricted, because there's not a permanent deed. That whatever rent restrictions there attached to the voucher, so they would not show up in this number.
Can we legislate? In other words, would this ordinance impose its will on Section 8 landlords? Or would they be exempt from this because of the HUD relationship with FMRs?
No, that's something we'd need to look into. I don't know off the top.
So that's a question that would be nice to hear back from. And I know we'll get a more complete picture when we move forward. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We'll look into that, Councilman.
Vice Mayor, please.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for your presentation. I have a few questions. Starting on page 4 with the cap allowable rent. It's at right now for San Leandro, it's at 5% plus CPI. So right now it's at 7%, correct? With the CPI?
I think when we did the rent review report at the end of December, I think for this year it was about 7%, right? So
and that 10% max, that's total, right? So, or it can only get up to 10%.
10%, right?
And for our mobile home ordinance, what percentage are we? Is it 4.5% or 4%?
It's the lower of or we have the rent review program ordinance, which is not rent control. Of course, it's more of a public kind of negotiation. That has a cap of 7% or less. And so sometimes when we get the calls, we remind people that, it triggers a potential rent review hearing too, if they go below 7.
Yeah,
So
we haven't had a rent review board meeting in a long time.
we haven't since probably before COVID. Yeah. So.
And my other question is, okay, you already asked one about Lakeside. It's in my district. The other question is for the annual fee amount. Did you say that the tenant has to pay 50% of it? It usually up to 50%?
They don't have to, but the landlord has the ability to pass through 50% of that. So I think that's why as we go forward with a potential program, we would be mindful of what kind of fees we establish.
What is that amount based on? Because I see that Oakland has like 7 different rent control things, and they're only paying $101 a unit, and Alameda is paying 109, 162, and they only have 14,000 units compared to 94. So what is that based on, the programs or just what we decide? Or
well, yeah, and I think when you do that kind of fee study, we are kind of embarking on that on a broader city level. As you want to factor in, what is part of a program? What does your staff review? Are there hearings? Are there, do you pay for attorneys or outside appeal officers? So you would kind of factor in all those that would hours, staff time that might go into a program, and then come up with a fee and again, come up with a fee that would not be a burden to multiple parties, but be it the tenants or the housing providers themselves too. So.
All right, my last question is on the rent registration. How is that working in other cities? I mean, they're getting all the information, so they're knowing, how many units each landlord has and how much they're paying for rent. Does it seem like it's a good process in those cities, or what have we found out about that?
Yeah, I think for those cities, and I think the 3 that are on this one, for example, Alameda and Oakland, actually, I don't. Hayward might, but it's not listed here from staff. But I think it's a tracking. It's definitely a means of tracking and for compliance as well. With if you have rent stabilization, if you have other things as well. So I know City of Alameda, theirs is fairly new, but I've seen that, and they have to post their rents if they raise it that year. Okay. Those type of things. So,
okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
this point in time, seeing no other questions, we're going to take public comment before we engage in our discussion.
Okay, there's quite a few public commenters, so I'm going to call people up two at a time. Jose Carlos Moreno Soria and Kay Lee Figueroa.
I would like to encourage the council to actually actively and try to expedite the process of passing rent regulations and tenant protections, and to not have a bunch of loopholes where eventually it's toothless, unenforced, or it's just messaging. It doesn't actually help anyone. And it's not just about capping how much rent rises, but there should be some action to actually have rent reduction. Landlords don't provide value. They eat up any gains in wages. They eat up any gains in business. They do nothing. They don't even maintain their properties. There's so much neglect and disrepair and abuse and everything. I just want city council to actually treat this as a serious issue and not just one more thing on the agenda, one more thing to waste your time on.
Thank you. Kay Lee Figueroa and then Jenny Madsen.
You wonder why no tenants show up for matters that greatly concern them. One good reason is intimidation, like during the meetings updating the rent ordinance. Tom Silver got up in front of the chamber full of renters in attendance and said he was meeting a housing court judge for lunch the following week, and he was inviting the mayor and city council to join him. And no one, not the mayor, no city council member, not the city attorney, not the community development director, called this out as being a conflict of interest at best or just plain corrupt at worst. It was meant to send a message that no matter what, the landlords had the deck stacked against tenants from all sides. And how about when the mayor was trying to word the ordinance, she directly asked Silva to write up the wording for the proposal, but didn't ask any tenant to write anything. Again, look around this room. Not a police officer who came in a little bit before there. 7, 8 years ago, this room was ringed with police officers because people sitting there were Black and brown and AAIP, okay? And they were treated like they were a threat, okay? That's intimidation also, okay? Now, let's address the demographics of who's going to be affected by these rent increases. At that time, and I'm using data that's a little bit old, the city population was 12% African American. Fully 75% of them were renters. There was 27% Hispanic population here, of which 52% were renters. I don't remember the figures for API. So there is definitely, no matter what anybody says, there is a racial impact to these policies. And whether you like it or not.
Thank you. Your time is up.
Oh, okay.
Jenny Madsen and then Mark Janowitz.
My name's Jenny Madsen, and you now can see me. This is a very rare occasion because I don't go out too much anymore. The people, this is a grassroots movement. These people live in San Leandro. It's half the population are renters. And the rent review board really just made them feel like they didn't count. And that is what what other speakers are saying. You need to know that half the population needs to believe that the government of this city doesn't consider them garbage, because that is what people feel out here. That is the feeling. Including the anti-harassment is great. I have been at Hayward meetings about rent. I know what they set up. I did the same with Alameda. I don't make it into Oakland, but I watch state meetings. This has become my life, and it wasn't my choice. It was forced upon me because of things that I saw. And this will probably never save me. I'll be gone before this. And Pete, I'll be gone. But I'm not going quietly, because this is wrong to treat half the population like they're dirt. And the anti-harassment is really important. The whole point of Just Cause is to have local enforcement and understanding of it. Because where do you go to court in Sacramento? No, it needs to be understood and dealt with locally. The Rent Review Board, I don't know when it was a good idea, but it is run for and by landlords. I have never seen a tenant walk out of that without feeling like they had been used and intimidated in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Janowitz, Bernard Ashcraft.
Evening, council members. Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity of addressing you. I want to urge you to make this a priority, make passing strong and meaningful rent stabilization and Just Cause a priority. The city staff, while I recognize it's a huge undertaking to write these ordinances and to implement it, to staff up, a year from now, there will be a lot of people that have fallen victim to evictions, and that will fall on all of us. Nobody likes to see the people that used to be housed on the streets. We all complain about that. Well, this is your opportunity to do something about that, to minimize the human suffering. So I would urge you to pass strong rent stabilization and strong Just Cause for eviction ordinances as soon as possible. Within the 1 year period, if possible. I do acknowledge it's a big undertaking. I want to comment that the state, a lot of people have said, well, we have statewide rent control and Just Cause. I know from a practitioner every single day that those are really just attempting to placate the tenant side of the equation, to say, well, we gave you Just Cause, we gave you rent stabilization on the state level. I am here to tell you, as a practitioner who is dealing with this every single day, those are very, very weak and cover very, very few. You have the opportunity to pass meaningful ordinances that cover as many people as possible and fulfill the purpose of these ordinances, which is protection of the community. You can do this by passing a 60% rent cap. That's perfectly legal. San Francisco has it, Berkeley has it, Oakland has it. It has passed muster. It is perfectly legal. Just Cause ordinance, it was asked before, are they legal? Absolutely. Birkenfeld versus City of Berkeley, Fisher versus City of Berkeley, Rental Association of Northern Alameda County. These are perfectly legal. Section 8 tenants are covered by rent, are covered by Just Cause, but they're not covered by.
Bernard Ashcraft, Jackie Props,
I'm Bernard Ashcraft, Bay Area Business Roundtable. And I've sent Mr. Mayor, council members and staff, I've sent you a letter. And I think one of the responses was for me to send over some specifics. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because I work with a collaborative. It will not just be a Bernard Ashcraft specifics. It will be specifics from a well-qualified collaborative. Our collaboration team will be a big tent that includes HUD, Housing and Urban Development, Attorney General Housing, Attorney General Bob Bonta's office, our congressional representatives, the Honorable Barbara Lee, our representatives from the State Senate and Assembly, and of course, our community advocates. Some of our community advocates are already here, housing advocates who've already done a tremendous amount of research and work. Jenny Matson, Emily Rich, Mark Jakowitz, Jeremy Schaefer, and our collaborative will include an unhoused member. Our collaborative will include a recently evicted member. You see, San Leandro, after 150 years of redlining, complicit redlining, now you have an opportunity to do what should have been done a long time ago. And let me just say to my good brother, Tom Lau, you see, let's quit using other cities to compare what we're trying to do. Let's make our housing policy so fair, so strong, other cities will seek our expertise. Let's make sure that we have a system in place that says we can do this.
Thank you. Your time is up.
I understand. This policy will affect workers.
Thank you, Mr. Ashcraft. Thank you, Mr. Ashcraft.
Jackie Props and then Craig Williams.
And I would continue to ask our speakers, please try to respect that time. We've got plenty of time. We've got a year-long process, so there's going to be plenty of time to chat with us.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your work. I want to say everything that Mark and Ginny, and they all have excellent points. San Leandro has a rich reserve of engaged, intelligent people who know a lot of stuff, and I really urge you to reach out to them. I would like City Council to carefully consider everything that is proposed by staff. The limit to rent increases at or below the rising cost of living, real local just cause for eviction protections, and a rental registry that requires notification to the city of rent increases and evictions. And please develop an effective community stabilization board that actually has teeth, that has authority to make decisions, not something that's, like Juan Carlos said, is just another thing to placate people. So thank you for your time. And let's get this done, because for every letter to the editor in the San Leandro Times that tries to paint unhoused people as drug addicts, and you know that's not the case, right? People encounter things in their lives that, you know, shit happens. So please think of all the people that will lose their housing when the moratorium expires. Thanks.
Thank you. Craig Williams and then John Minot.
Hi, my name is Craig Williams, and basically I support the rent stabilization effort, rent control, just cause. Also, you know, there isn't a tenant organization in San Leandro. There's something like 40% of the population are tenants, yet, you know, without an organization, the tenants don't really have a voice. So I think if there's going to be fees collected, or, you know, even if it's like 3% that you're going to raise the rents, if 1% went to helping tenants to organize, to actually have a tenant organization in the city, this would be a tremendous advancement for San Leandro tenants. The second thing is maybe take a look at New York City in terms of the rent freeze that they have for senior citizens. They have a system where if you're a senior citizen, you get a rent freeze, and the landlord gets a tax deduction to cover that fee. So if you could look into that, you know, I think that would be a step in the right direction. The third thing is that thing that I handed out to you guys, which is about what's happening in China. China is our biggest rival right now. We have to compete against China on so many levels. And within that flyer that I handed out, they're manufacturing as much as the United States and the UE combined right now. And a big reason why that happens is because of their savings rate. They have a savings rate, a household savings rate of over 40%. In order to get to 40% savings, you can't be paying much money for rent. And so what happens in China is that that money is going into the banking system, and that money becomes available for industry. And so that's why they're doing such a tremendous job. If we want to compete with them, you know, we have to keep rents down as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. John, it's Minot, correct? Minot. John Minot, and then Faye Yassini.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Council members. I'd like to draw your attention to another number that you haven't seen up here tonight, and that is the number of cost-burdened rental households in San Leandro. According to the census, that was in 2021, 42% of renter-occupied households in San Leandro were paying more than 35% of their income in rent. That is punishing, that is crushing, and it is thousands of households. It was about, I believe, 6,000 was the number they quoted. Our situation has been grinding so long that is the territory where a missed paycheck means maybe you're homeless, maybe you live in Houston now, but it is not conducive to having a vibrant city with economic diversity. It is economic segregation. People think this situation is natural because it's been grinding so long. It isn't. It is amenable to policy, and I support these policies to protect tenants. They are not perfect. They will certainly not do everything because no policy does everything. But the research shows the tenant protection legislation protects the people who are most vulnerable, and it is effective in that. It is simple, understandable, and workable. I'm a recent homeowner, and I'm here partly because I do not want to be pulling up the ladder behind me. I think that the kinds of regulations being put on the table here for further study, they would be fair if something changed with my situation and I had to rent out my home. I think they would be fair. So please direct staff to put before the council solid options to stabilize rents numerically, to better enforce that via rental registry, and to make and via just cause protections and assistance to tenants to make use of those protections, such as legal aid, because normally they will not have it unless it is there to provide the level playing field. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Faye Yassini, and then Jeremy Schaefer.
Good evening, Mayor Gonzalez and City Council members. Faye Yassini with the California Apartment Association. The California Apartment Association is a nonprofit association that offers education, advocacy, and other resources to help rental housing providers offer quality homes for California. Tonight's presentation was given without conducting efficient research to assess whether San Leandro even needs stricter regulations that exceed state law. The CAA urges the City Council to refrain from imposing unnecessary layers of regulations. Instead, focus on ways to help housing providers who have had tenants that took advantage of the eviction moratorium and did not pay rent to receive the payments they are owed. Please be reminded.
Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt you. So we went through this in earlier meetings. Everyone respects everybody, right? Everybody respects her. Everybody gets a chance to express their point of view. So let's be clear. If we can't behave amicably, then we'll have less people attending our session. Okay? All I'm asking is that everybody gets their chance to speak, that they can be heard and there's no distractions. So I'm going to ask you to go back about one paragraph and begin again.
Thank you. The CAA urges the City Council to refrain from imposing unnecessary layers of regulations and instead focus on ways to help housing providers who have had tenants that took advantage of the eviction moratorium and did not pay rent to receive the payments they are owed. Please be reminded that the Emergency Rental Assistance Program only provided assistance for 15 months out of the 40 months that the eviction moratorium was in place here in San Leandro. As mentioned in the presentation, AB 1482 already has robust laws for rent control and just cause that uphold renter rights. The tenant anti-harassment proposal also exists in California civil law. Under Civil Code 1940.2, it is illegal for a housing provider to make a tenant leave a unit by making threats, menacing conduct, or by entering the tenant's unit in substantial violation of the law, and to take or deprive or remove the tenant's property from the unit without consent. Also, California Civil Code 1942.5 prohibits tenant harassment. Housing providers who violate the rules are subject to punitive measures. What is not mentioned in the presentation, however, is what outreach or education the city has done to acquaint renters with their rights under various state laws. Duplicative and unnecessary regulations on rental housing will only exacerbate our housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Schaefer, and then Carol. Yep.
Good evening, Council. It's great to be here. I want to say the time is now. This is the time. You know, you look at the expiration, 2030, right? Oh, we've got these protections from the state level. These are emergency protections. I've been asking Council, not you all, but different members of the Council, and some of you, for 7 years for tenant protections. These expire in 7 years. It's going to be a year before we pass according to the schedule. We're supposed to have a workshop this month. This is now scheduled for next spring. These things float, they move, right? You've got a staff that is, you know, doing the best they can with what they have, but they're still under staffing levels from 2008 cuts, right? They're not getting this done anytime quickly, but we need to expedite this. If we're talking about doing this, we're going to have a political debate about housing in the summer and fall of 2024. You all won't be the ones making the decisions. Some of you may or may not be here by the time you get around to it in 2025. This is the time. You've got a great smorgasbord of different options up there. I think they're all good. You want to have them all. You want to have the just cause. You want to have the tenant, you know, the limits to rent increases. And, you know, I'll say the reason you do that with inflation, you know, there's been a little talk about inflation. Certain items do go up with inflation, right? Price of lumber, price of, you know, different things. What doesn't change with inflation is your mortgage cost. So having something less than inflation makes a lot of sense in this area, right? When you put money in people's pockets. So I came at this, you know, looking at everything. A city is the people that are in it, right? How do we protect the people that are in our city? And what I came by looking at every issue in the city was that when you protect housing, you make the community stable and you impact everything, public safety, education, make the city stable and everybody benefits. The businesses, the homeowners, and the renters. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Haberos and Emily Rich.
Good evening, Mayor Gonzalez and City Council and staff. Thank you, Tamila, for putting this together. Amazing. So housing is a human right. Does everybody agree with that? Shouldn't everyone be housed? Yes. Okay. Most of us agree. Okay. I'm a renter in San Leandro. I've been a renter since 2008. And I've worked and lived here in San Leandro. I pay 2/3 of my current salary on rent right now. 2/3. Luckily, I have a partner that I live with that shares, everything else with me. But my rent goes up every year. It has gone up a lot. So as renters, I think a lot of us feel like we're at the mercy of our landlords or property owners or property management. We have no control, and this is something that will help us. This is something that can really help all the renters to feel better, because I know I'm at the mercy, and I feel every year I'm not sure what's going to happen next, and I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be able to stay here. So I think a lot of renters have that feeling. It's the uncertainty of what's going to happen next, because there's not strong rent stabilization or just cause. So I want to read something. This is from the Princeton University Journal of Public and International Affairs. Just cause policies have been shown to work. A study of just cause ordinances in 4 California cities found that policies were effective in decreasing eviction. In concert with other anti-displacement strategies, just cause policies can help shift the power imbalance between landlords and tenants in the housing ecosystem. Eviction protections promote equity, since people of color disproportionately rent and face greater eviction risks. Studies have found that Black renters experience evictions at higher rates than other racial ethnic groups. One more thing I want to say. Just cause also protects tenants who report inadequate housing conditions or request repairs, making it less risky.
Thank you. Your time is up.
Exercise their right to livable conditions. Thank you.
Emily Rich and Tuan N.
I know that many politicians object to rent stabilization measures because they believe interfering with free market capitalism is bad. But the reality is that housing scarcity is not the result of free market forces. Housing scarcity is the result of regulation that is benefiting housing providers. Since 1970, 3 major forces have caused housing prices to increase dramatically. First, restrictive zoning, particularly density restrictions like single-family zoning or limiting construction to at most 2 stories. 2, community involvement in the permitting process, allowing current residents to lobby their city councils to deny new development. And 3, the enactment of environmental laws that present obstacles to development and laws designating land for preservation, and these have reduced available lands. There are other forces at play as well. Cities favor commercial development over residential because commercial development can yield more sales and business tax revenue than residential. Also, residential development has greater associated service costs like schools, public safety, roads, parks. The California Environmental Quality Act has been misused by various groups to prevent housing from being developed. Current residents who don't want development next door to them because they prefer to live in a less dense neighborhood, or they fear their home values will decline, use CEQA to prevent or delay housing development to the point that the cost to developers becomes too high. In 2019, the Council of Economic Advisors estimated that deregulating the housing market would lead to rents falling by from 40 to 55% in San Francisco, San Diego, and Los Angeles. Don't get me wrong, I don't want the housing market to be deregulated. My point here is that housing providers are operating in a system that benefits their ability to increase rental rates beyond that which would be possible under free market conditions. I believe it is therefore fair, under my definition of fair, to restrict that unfettered ability. Thank you.
Thank you. Tuan, and then George Wu.
So we looked at a lot of different cities that have all sorts of housing regulations. We looked at Oakland here, which has very strict housing regulations, rent control for decades, similar in Berkeley, similar in San Francisco. Has any of these housing regulations actually helped housing availability, affordability in Oakland, Berkeley, or San Francisco for decades? If they worked, why are economists so concerned and said that doesn't make sense based on simple, fundamental economic principles? We're arguing with experts. We're arguing with reality on the ground. And if we want homeless problems that Oakland has, that Berkeley has, maybe adopt their policies. Housing is extremely difficult to do. We need to support the people who provide it. We need to pay for the people who build it, who dig the trenches for foundation, who frame it, plumbers, electricians. Housing providers pay the bank because the bank pays the people who do the hard work of building those homes. And housing providers work on weekends to maintain those homes. It's not easy to do. And when you put a 60% of inflation cap, that means you can't adjust rent to even match inflation. It's 60% of inflation. That means rent goes down each and every year forever. That's why there's no construction or investment in housing in Oakland. Permits are down. People cannot afford rent because it's impossible to build in Oakland. We need policies that work, that support the people who do the hard work of providing housing. And yes, it is hard work. Dig the trenches with me, frame with me, pay for the material. Plywood went up 300% during the pandemic. Rent and shelter was less than 2%. Gas was 35%. You guys get rent, salary increases, right? 60% of inflation.
Thank you. Your time is up. George Wu, and then Chris Moore.
Good evening. I'm not talking about the details, but I strongly request one more time to council members to provide language help for the Asian community in San Leandro. 35% Asian people here, they don't speak good English. My English is poor, but some of them are worse than mine. They like to come here to speak, but they hesitate. When I am staying here, I received a lot of people text me message. They want to speak. They want me to be a representative to request you give them an opportunity to express their opinion. Thank you. Next meeting, I hope you will offer the language assistance for those people. Thank you.
Chris Moore, and then Chris Bammer.
Hello, Chris Moore, East Bay Rental Housing Association, volunteer board member. Tom, thanks for putting this information together. I go to a lot of city council meetings across the Bay Area. I don't think I ever see the amount of information put together and this is just the start. It's critical to have the data and see what's going on in the community. And so thank you for putting that together. And we look forward to this over the next year. Data is important. I heard a couple of data points outside. And I think some of the things Tom and team should look at and consider is certainly Oakland. According to Leah Simon Weisberg at ACE, the legal director there, Oakland has the strongest rental protections, rent control and rental protections in the country. Oakland also, as soon as they implemented rent control, it was around 1980, the Black population declined. So it was skyrocketing. And then in 1980, it started to decline, has declined ever since. Berkeley has very stringent rent controls. There used to be a Black Berkeley Property Owners Association. It's gone. So it has had these unintended consequences in the community. And I think what I'd like to say is, as Tom crafts this, and there are certainly and there are typically unintended consequences from these renter protections and rental stabilization items. And we're housing providers. You have housing providers here, and you also have tenant organizations here. We both have different perspectives. We offer this to Alameda County. It was not accepted, but we'd love to see Mark and Leah and others come to the table with a couple of housing provider organizations as Tom crafts the legislation. And we talk about our perspectives on it and what are the unintended consequences. And that's how we'll craft, I think, a proper and appropriate legislation that'll benefit everybody. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Bammer.
I don't have anything intelligent to say, so I'm just going to read something I found online. I'm writing to express my support for privatization, citywide rent stabilization, and just cause eviction ordinances at your July 17th meeting to be implemented at the earliest possible date. I've written at length previously about who I am and why I care about San Leandro tenants, tenant protections. You know who I am. Cost of housing has exploded in San Leandro like everywhere, especially in California and the Bay Area. In San Leandro, the median home price is nearly $825,000, while the median rent for a 2-bedroom apartment tops $2,300 a month. The only way that thousands of working people, young people, and seniors are able to make it here is to rent. There is no rent control in San Leandro, which means the renters are one unexpected rent increase away from being forced out of their homes and out of our communities. I urge you to support rent control ordinances that would, 1, place an annual cap based on inflation on how much landlords can raise rents. 2, establish just cause evictions protections to prevent arbitrary evictions and protect renters who are evicted due to no fault of their own. I hope that at your July 17th meeting, you give staff strongest possible direction to begin working on these ordinances and to engage all members of the community in the process, but especially the voices of groups who have been historically marginalized by housing policies, including low-income tenants, people of color, and I'm going to add seniors. Thank you, Jeannie Madsen, member of Unity in the Community of San Leandro, First Wednesdays of San Leandro, East Bay Housing Organization, Alliance of Californians for the Community of Empowerment. I'm happy to see Jeannie at meetings because when I first started coming 5.5 years ago, she would be there every time. And she knows the frustrations that I feel, even more so because she's been coming a lot longer and she understands this stuff way more. And all these people that you put in here, that you held them here this late, you rearrange the agenda for your benefit, for the council's benefit, not for the people that are here, the people that take the time to come here.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, there's no more public comment in person.
At this point in time, before we begin our deliberation, let's take our bio break that usually comes at 8:30, but we're a little bit late. So let's come back in 10 minutes. If you could put up a timer for us.
IT, can you do a 10-minute timer for break?
Okay, let's gather, please.
IT, we're back.
Selena? Okay, we are back in session. At this point in time, if people could take their seats, please. At this point in time, we will be taking, excuse me, would people please take their seats or carry their conversations outside the chamber? Mr. Moore, Chris Moore, would you please either take a seat or go outside the chamber? Okay, so at this point in time, we're going to move to the part of this item where we take council member discussion, commentary, exploration, so that we can formulate guidance to staff as to the next step in this process. So I will gladly proceed with whoever would like to go first. Okay, don't everyone buzz in at once. Councilmember Reynes, please.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that I'm very glad that we're finally having this conversation as a council and discussing our options to move forward together, and hopefully with a very robust community engagement process. Whenever we have the opportunity to help over 6,000 households, I think that's very special. One of the speakers, John Minot, highlighted some statistics with our rent burdened households. I also want to talk about some statistics as I lead up to my recommendation. So the median rent in San Leandro is $2,395 according to Zillow. That means that a first-year teacher at San Leandro High School would have to pay 42% of their take-home salary to live here. And a grocery store worker at the downtown Safeway making $15 an hour would have to pay every cent of their 40-hour-a-week job towards rent, which means they would need a second job if they wanted to live in the city where they work. And this is just if they were living alone, not if they were supporting a family. So you can imagine what a 10% increase would do if this is your day-to-day reality. Also a fact, we know from our new council orientation and the recent statewide survey done by UCSF that inability to pay rent is the #1 cause of homelessness. I just want to read into the record an email that we all received, but I want it into the record from a resident who talked about the connection between rent hikes and homelessness. This is a quote. Rents keep going up every year, and even though I supposedly get only a 7% increase a year, I now pay $500 more a month in rent than when I moved in. I was a single parent who didn't have much of a paycheck left after just keeping my head above water. So many of us who rent are making minimum wage, and a lot are just one more rent increase away from being homeless themselves. End quote. And she goes on to talk about how her Social Security and her pension would barely keep up with the rising cost of rent, even if the rent was capped at 3%, which it isn't. But one reason why I'm so passionate about this issue is rent stabilization isn't just about preventing homelessness. It's about having a strong workforce, keeping families close by, mitigating the environmental impacts caused by long commutes when people can't afford to live where they work, of keeping the diversity in our city that we care so much about, from economic diversity to racial diversity to age diversity. And I know all of us want this to be a city for everyone. So I'm, again, glad that we're pursuing it. I want to also address in my comments that state protections right now are insufficient, both in terms of rent stabilization and just cause. As we know, as from the presentation, the state law caps increases at 10%, and this is unsustainable and way in excess of what local ordinances permit. No one experiences a 10% increase in their income, whether they're living on wages, Social Security, pensions, or whatever. You are very lucky if your income keeps pace with inflation. My household's income definitely didn't this year. And we had another speaker talk about inflation. I agree, rents should be tied in some way to inflation, to the cost of living, etc. Mortgages don't increase with inflation, but rents seem to increase in excess of inflation all the time. And this is completely unsustainable for people. Another reason why state protections are not sufficient. The state's just cause law includes huge number of tenancies which could be protected by a local ordinance. And just cause should apply to as many people as possible for many reasons, but one of them is without it, enforcing housing discrimination laws becomes extremely difficult, because a landlord can evict someone for no reason, and they might have a secret reason, such as not wanting that person to live in their apartment complex because of their race, or because of any other factor, really. So third, state law doesn't have a remedy provision to enforce it, and as a result, there are no consequences for failure. Local ordinances all have separate sections that provide legal remedies so that tenants can bring civil action to encourage compliance. And finally, local ordinances can have enhanced notice requirements that contain important information to explain to the tenant what is happening and what relocation benefits they are entitled to, so that when a tenant is served an eviction notice, they can make an informed decision about what they will do as a result of receiving that notice. The state law doesn't have this provision, so it leaves a lot of our tenants without the resources to advocate for themselves. So we need it. We need rent control. We need just cause eviction. Honestly, all of the, Tom, all of the protections that you laid out tonight would be beneficial here. But I'm hoping that for the sake of time, if we were to prioritize, we would start with rent stabilization and just cause. These are two different type of ordinance that I believe has to be done together, though. And here's my reason. If we do rent stabilization without just cause, then a landlord could evict a tenant for no reason other than to raise the rent on the next person who rents that unit, right? If we pass just cause without rent stabilization, landlords could raise the rent so high that they constructively evict whoever is living there. So these are policies that should go hand in hand. And I think if we do develop them hand in hand, it gives our city the best chance at making sure the ordinances work well together. So I guess I'll talk with community outreach. Tom, you have my direction. I would like us to focus on rent stabilization and just cause. In terms of community outreach, here are some stakeholders that come to mind. Unity in the community. They have some members who are very involved in housing rights. Of course, we're probably going to work with Centro Legal de la Raza as a default because we contract with them. There's some San Leandro housing advocates with different perspectives, some of whom have come tonight, some of whom haven't, but we have Mark Janowitz from East Bay Community Law Center, Moira Fry from April Showers, Deborah Costa of Mission Bay, Beatrice Cardenas Duncan of Housing Action Coalition. They all have different perspectives and orientations when it comes to this, and I'm sure that other people in the community will pop up. A lot of people came out tonight that I think could be involved in that process. We have our housing commissioners. I would love to see the youth involved, the Social Justice Academy at San Leandro High School. If they have any interest, I would love to see young people involved. As I mentioned, there are some people who showed up today. There's First Wednesdays in San Leandro. There's the San Leandro Tenants Union, which I've heard talked about, which I think has been active since around 2018. And it's Jeremy Schaefer is currently working on it. So I think that would be something to explore. I'm told that they're doing a lot of outreach right now. The coalition that Bernard Ashcraft expressed interest in putting together would also be a great resource. So that's everything I'm thinking of right now, in addition to local landlord and landlord groups. I think that obviously we need to reach out to everybody, and that would include some of the entities that have come out tonight. I recorded, what was your organization? East Bay Rental Housing Association. There was another woman who was here representing a group. Great. So obviously we should reach out to them as well. I will say, if we're doing both groups, I really do think they need to be two separate meetings. I've heard from folks tonight about intimidation that happens even in the council room chambers. We heard a commenter about, I was told after that this chamber was once flooded with 100 tenants, that there were once 100 tenants coming in here demanding some sort of tenant protections, and that they felt so intimidated and shut down that they haven't been organizing since. And I think that if you have tenants in the room being asked to give feedback on what it feels like to be renting in San Leandro, and they're in the same room as potentially their landlord, that could lead to more of that intimidation. So I think as we do outreach, we should have separate meetings, and maybe a third meeting that's just for nonprofit housing, nonprofits that don't really have a stake either way. So just separating those out, providing language accessibility at these meetings. We've done a really good job, I think, as a city in advertising these meetings in multiple languages. But once people get there, having translation, even if it's a meeting conducted on Zoom and we can get the translation that occurs on Zoom, I think there's a subtitle button that translates people as they're talking as one of the features on Zoom. I also feel like in addition to robust outreach, I really liked the timeline that was provided here. I wish that we could do it sooner, obviously, but I think that the timeline, we don't want to push it back further. I think that we can't rush the community engagement process, and we all deserve on council time to do our own research as well. I don't want to see it pushed out much later than the timeline that you presented. I think that's already, I don't want this falling into the hands of like the new council. I think we started this work here. We should finish it. So I'm hoping that we can move on it soon. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little. I think that's everything. That I have down. But I'm just really eager to hear from my fellow council members about what they'd like to see in terms of a community engagement process and policies. So I'll leave it there.
Councilmember Bowen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Reyes, for those thoughts. You covered a lot of what I was thinking as well. I think one of the things that I want to just start off with, obviously thanking Tom and the city staff for working on this. Like, this is the beginning of a really important conversation. So I appreciate everybody coming out and speaking their truth and their experiences, and they're all valid. And I just want to encourage all of us to give a little grace to each other, and especially for us on the council, we are really trying to listen. I am really sorry if people have felt like they could not speak what they wanted to speak and share what they wanted to share, but we really do want to, and I'll speak for myself, and I think my council colleagues as well, is, this is going to be a hard conversation that we're going to continue to have. But what's really amazing is that we're coming together right now and we're saying we are going to craft something for San Leandro. Once I asked Director Liao, I said, can you give me an example of a really solid, successful policy that really kind of meets all the needs? And he's like, well, that's a little bit hard to do because it really isn't cut and paste, right? It is for our community. We have a whole slew of potential policies that I think we should explore and say, what does this mean? And the question around trying to build something and craft something is, what questions are we trying to answer? What information are we trying to gather? Who are we trying to talk to? And I would also add, another goal is really to think about like, what do we understand about the outreach and the communications that we've had so far around rent control or rent stable control, rights, benefits, resources, all of those things that, in the conversations we've had, clearly people may not understand the full picture. So all that to say, I think that as we start this process, and I'm really glad that Carrie is here, part of the team. I imagine that the team could probably grow even more too, so they could add more people to be able to help. But thinking about the different areas of data and information that we really need to be able to help us inform our decision. I think that we really need to craft a nuanced and intentional policy for our community, which means that we have to engage everybody. I think what those meetings could look like, I would suggest probably doing some outreach to see what will work best. The idea that some people have showed up in this room is great, but not everybody shows up, and there's lots of different avenues to be able to share ideas. Language access is a huge thing, understanding who we're trying to serve. So really understanding, as we start this process, what are the questions? What information are we trying to get from the community in these listening sessions? What's the cost of each of these? What's the impact of it? What are the benefits? What is it if we just do one or the other or all of them? What does that mean for the city? What can't we do? What can we do? There's obviously benefits and downsides to all of these, and how does one impact the other? What's going to be more palatable to the general community? What can we start? I don't think we're gonna be able to do all of it at once. I am not the expert in the room on this, and so I'm going to be really eager to hear from all of the experts. And even if you aren't an expert, as a renter, I've been a renter in San Leandro, as a housing provider, what is that experience like? What resources would we need to allocate from the city? Where are we going to get those resources? How are we going to fund it? Who bears that cost? The 6,319 units, like what data do we have on them? And then also for evictions, like what's the data on the evictions of those units as well as the city in general? I know there's a lot of information we're still trying to gather. And And then in terms of stakeholders, incredibly important to craft this with all stakeholders. I think we're all going to say that. We can't stress that enough. But I think the reality is it's going to be hard. And it's going to require compromise on an openness from everybody, that certainly from us as a council. I would love an open survey for the entire community that just stays up, and you can have your broad general questions and say, like, this is what we're considering. These are the things that we've had in the city. This is what other cities have done. What are your thoughts on it? Just to get a pulse check. Supporting that outreach process with like a concerted effort from everybody. And there's so many things that are possible that we haven't even thought of yet. And I think the idea is that we have to assume that's the truth, right? As we start having conversations with people, there are going to be things that we're going to come up with and say, oh, this might work better for us. And so I just really, I'm encouraged by the conversation, and I really do appreciate everybody's passion. And I think that the reality is we all have a shared humanity, and we're going to do this for the community. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out here, especially to some of you that don't come out very often, whether because of your health or weather or transportation. Thank you for coming out and speaking. It's important to us. I think it's important for us to look into all these: just cause, the rent registry, and tenant anti-harassment. Because what I see what's going on in San Leandro right now is San Leandro is getting gentrified. I'm just being honest with the community. It's getting gentrified. All the people that are paying $1,300, $1,500, $1,800 a month, they're given reasons. Not all landlords. There's a lot of good landlords in San Leandro, but it's happening with some of them. Is they're trying to get reasons to kick them out so they can pay the new rate. The new rate's $3,000, $4,000 a month. So we do need some protections here in San Leandro, and we have to look in them. We have to see what benefits the whole community, tenants and landlords. We have to listen to everybody for this. That's my opinion, and that's my direction to look into all these. Thank you.
Councilmember Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez. I think, there's someone had talked about intimidation, and I think, when I ran for city council, I ran on a slate. And talk about intimidation when you have a developer who files 286 fraudulent counts on your campaign to try to scare you from running for office. That happened. And, we responded to all the allegations. They came back unsustained. So here I am, 4.5 years later, advocating for rent stabilization. I think, the time is now. We have this timeline. I think we need to push and advocate that, under staff constraints or time, if it's possible to do this before the end of the year, have those community talks, those chats. I think, there are a lot of folks in San Leandro that are avid, that actively want rent stabilization. I have a lot of constituents that come to me and say that, our cap is 7%. The state cap is 10. Year over year, if your rent is $2,000, it goes up about $140 plus year over year. A lot of people can't afford that. That is way above the cost of inflation. I think, the direction here, and folks that I've talked to say that a compromise would be 3.5% in San Leandro, but that has to be coupled with just cause. And so that is something that, we'll get stakeholder feedback, community feedback. I think, rent stabilization is doing two things. It's controlling rents, but it's also controlling evictions too. So we want to make sure that we're also preserving our community. Folks talk about folks getting priced out in San Leandro. I just want to make sure that we're also keeping our community here. With regards to outreach, we need to also include farmers markets, meet folks where they're at, libraries. We also need to advertise in multiple languages to make sure this is inclusive. We have George who says that, he translates for folks, and I did advocate last time to have a translator. So next meeting with regards to community outreach, we have translators so that folks can come and feel comfortable and not intimidated to come and speak, let alone by those folks in our community. But I think, this is something that has been years in the making, but I think we need to, with staff's will, And you'll let us know if, this is possible to try to do this before the end of the year, because we do have an election coming up. And so I think, that will change the dynamic. And I think that we can get this done before the end of 2023. That's just my thinking. And you can let me know if, we need some pushback on that. But I think in order to implement this is to get the community feedback, get the stakeholder feedback, and craft something that one has rental cap increase along with just cause for eviction. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Blue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to everyone who showed up tonight on Zoom. I apologize if you didn't get a chance to talk. I know that can be frustrating, and our IT department is doing the best they can. It's just sometimes we've got some equipment that we've got to deal with. Thank you to all who spoke. I think I've said it before, when it comes to landlords and tenants, the people involved there's probably 98% of people are really good landlords and good tenants, but housing costs are an issue. But we have to have a balance. I do want to say, for the record, if you want to talk and you're afraid to talk, call me confidentially. Meet with me confidentially. I'll meet you out of town. I'll meet you on Zoom. I don't care. If you have something that needs to be said, don't email it. Don't put it where it's public recognizable. Just call me and we'll go talk somewhere. I am really good about keeping confidence. It's a big value for me. And I think the rest of my colleagues would say the same thing. We do want to hear from you, and we don't want you to feel like you can't say anything because you're afraid, even if it means that we have to keep your identity sacred. That actually happened during the mobile home stabilization ordinance. I met with a few people offline confidentially because they wanted to be heard, but they didn't want to come to meetings or know who they were. They didn't want their landlords knowing. The one thing I haven't heard tonight is a conversation about the protections for landlords. We write in something that educates tenants about their rights. We have good tenants too in San Leandro. This would be for the 2% that don't know that they can't be raising hell and having a party at 11:30 at night if it's bothering the other tenants, that kind of stuff. I think especially for the mom and pop landlords who try and do their best to keep their properties up and turn a little bit of a return of investment and profit, or at least pay for a little bit of their retirement. So I think we have to be balanced in our approach. I am interested in some specific data as we move forward with this process. What's it going to cost us? Who's going to pay it? Is it going to be the landlords? Is it going to be a pass through? What's the percentage? What's the recommended percentage? I think we need to look at annual, when we're talking about whatever that magic number is, how much do taxes go up? How much does insurance go up? What about depreciation on appliances and routine maintenance? And then what's an acceptable return on investment for landlords? And it shouldn't be exorbitant, but they should be able to make a small profit, I think. And I haven't heard that question asked yet. So I don't know what that minimum ground is. I don't want to see landlords gouging tenants so that they can live high on the hog. But at the same time, I think it's unreasonable to expect that our small business people would be willing to operate a business at a loss. If it can't be done, then we need to find a different way for the formula. We need to find a different way for the city to intervene and help so tenants can afford to live where they're living and landlords can afford to continue providing that housing. I do have a question for the city attorney, Mr. Mogg. Can we legally exclude members of the public from any meeting that would move forward about this?
We can't exclude them from any public meeting, a Brown Act meeting between the city council, but we can have targeted meeting for groups at a staff level.
Okay. But if we had a targeted meeting and someone from a different perspective wanted to come, are they allowed to come? Or
yeah, and I think Tom can speak to what the process was during the mobile home rent review, but I do believe there were some level of targeted meetings during that process as well, if I remember.
Right. And I think also in broader context of community meetings that we did for planning and initiatives like the general plan and the housing element, that, we had combinations of, more open meetings, and you almost want to call them focus groups or stakeholder, you call them stakeholder meetings or focus groups. Part of it is, as the council member Reynos was saying, you want to give people that space, be it a tenant or a housing provider, to speak. So, we can try to, as we kind of assess this outreach and the input that you all are giving us. We've done that before, but we want to be mindful that we'll have open meetings here and there, but I think also want to create an environment that both parties can speak freely to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mogg. It's been my experience, and I try and keep things simple, but it's been my experience. It's not the housing providers that are intimidated to come to meetings. And I do respect that there are some tenants that have things to say, but they don't want to say it for fear of reprisal or retribution, et cetera. So that's why I asked that question. And again, if you want to be heard, contact us confidentially. In terms of who should be involved in the process, I think that was your last slide, Tom, and some of my colleagues have already gotten this. I think we need to hear from the tenant advocacy groups, not just the ones that are here, but Centro Legal, Echo Housing. We also need to hear from the landlord advocacy groups. They're going to make themselves known. Bay East, the California Apartment Association, who is here tonight, RHA of Alameda County, East Bay RHA, Bridge and Eden Housing, the Housing Authority of Alameda County, Building Futures for Women and Children, who are doing a lot of this work on the front lines, and a neutral economist, someone who can dispel the myths that, or maybe confirm the myths that if we have a rental ordinance that it'll bring rental units off the market, and if so, what percent? Or if we have a rental ordinance, the cost of rents going up to be exorbitant. Has that really happened in other areas? As I look at the 3 cities that were mentioned that have rent control, they're also the 3 highest rental cities. So is that because of economy or is that just a myth? I think a neutral economist could help you with that. And lastly, as already spoken by my colleagues, we definitely need to have translation services at all the meetings moving forward. Those are my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I'll give a final few thoughts, trying not to replicate everything that's already been said because it's been quite thorough. I'll begin from the premise that I've been a renter at 5 different locations in my life. I do understand some of the frustrations. I live them personally. I know there can be good landlords and not so good landlords. So I'm not blind to the reality. In the end, I am a big believer that choice is important. And so a uniform policy that applies to everybody uniformly, no matter of circumstance, I think misses the point that we need some variability and flexibility in policy, and then let markets decide that some people choose that, some people choose this, and there are benefits and consequences from the choices that get made. So choice is important. I am particularly curious about, I think that one of those last points that you had raised, Councilmember Blue, around the data that helps us define the need. And part of what we talk about is housing in the context of homelessness. But I look at some of the cities that have the highest or the most stringent regulations also seem to have very high homelessness. So I think just really trying to get our hand around, are we solving for a homelessness problem through this, or are we solving for a different problem, potential homelessness or improper evictions? Which then leads me to the question of, it seems like we have eviction data and we could do it on a sample basis, but for these cases that get filed, how many of these cases would have been prevented through some of the ordinances that we're talking about, and in particular, the just cause ordinance? So are people being evicted because in fact they are very difficult tenants? Or are they being evicted because they have difficult landlords and the protection would help them? And I think that there's publicly available data that could be mined and analyzed so you can really get a sense of who it is that we would be protecting. I think there's an interesting question. It's a long and storied literature around rent control and the impact on the quality of housing stock. And so I think understanding what has happened in other cities, not only in terms of quantity, but also quality. I think some of our public speakers talked about quantity, the availability, and people choosing to pull their housing off the market. But what about the quality? And might there be some, if we're really going to get into regulating markets and trying to make adjustments to the adjustment that we made, what about considering some sort of exemption, shall we say, or connection to investment in quality housing? I know at least some council members have expressed concerns about landlords that do not offer quality housing. So I'm trying to read my note here. Obviously, mutuality of anti-harassment. I know a number of landlords, generally small individual landlords, people that rent an ADU or a room in their home or something like that, who have talked to me about bad behavior by tenants, threatening behavior by tenants. And so people shouldn't be threatening each other, period. It shouldn't be one-sided. And so to be thinking about what that would look like if we're really going to go in that direction, make sure that nobody in the marketplace is harassing anybody else. There was an interesting statement made by one of our public commenters about market failure. Obviously, as a regulatory economist, that's my training, academic background, that's what I taught at Berkeley. Particularly curious about what is the market failure that's occurring here. Because independent of what we might do at a city level, we as a council have a legislative agenda. And it's important that we work together with other cities, other counties, other stakeholders to advocate at a state level to make sure that if there are challenges that exist, that we can overcome those challenges through adjusting legislation. And I'll close with this concept of fair rate of return. I think in regulatory economics, that's one of the biggest challenges, whether you're regulating an electric utility, whether you're regulating the housing market, whatever you choose to regulate, we expect as public employees, CalPERS, to deliver us a rate of return on our pensions. And that money is going to be there when we retire because it's invested wisely. If that money is invested by individuals not in CalPERS, but in a home, that individual presumably is entitled to some sort of rate of return on their investment. And I want to make sure that we're thinking about what that means, what that looks like, what those numbers are, how those numbers vary through time, circumstances, and conditions. Because in the end, if someone puts up $1 million to buy a rental unit, I don't know that it would be fair for them to not get a return that they could make someplace else for comparable risk. That is it. In the future, I will avoid interrupting you. I would ask that you avoid interrupting me. Back to the basic premise. That's your last warning. It's about 4 or 5 times today. I think that premise that when people tie up their own investments, whether it be at CalPERS, in their 401ks, or in rental housing, there's different avenues where people invest money. So until the government gets into the job of owning all housing, we need to recognize that reality. And so making sure that as we're doing our analysis, we are considering that. So at this point in time, I'll turn to you. I know you've been taking notes and hearing everybody's thoughts and things that you will be considering. Do you feel like you've got sufficient guidance to work with Director Liao and others?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do feel that way. Thank you for all your feedback tonight.
So thank you for everyone for showing up. Well, this is just the beginning. There will be lots more discussions, the opportunity to engage with us. At this point, we're going to move to our next agenda item, which if I remember correctly, it's going to be 13, but let's just click through it mechanically. We looked at amendment of the consent calendar number 9. We adopted our consent calendar number 10. Number 11, we dealt with items removed from the consent calendar, which I think was 10K. And then we dealt with that. And so our last item here, or our next item is 13. I want to start with 13A, which is a presentation by HR analyst Yana Tarin for a second reading of an ordinance. So as council will remember, we adopted the first reading 502 because we had 2 absences. And so we are now undertaking a second reading. It is not on consent because CalPERS requires through their regulations that we do this in person live before the public. So with that, I will hand it to you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. This is the second and final reading of the ordinance to approve a contract amendment with CalPERS. to include cost share with the San Leandro unrepresented safety executive employees. The affected employee has confirmed an agreement to the cost share in the secret ballot, which is required by CalPERS. Adoption of the ordinance is the final step in the required process. If approved, a contract amendment will be effective September 1st, which is 30 days after the adoption of the ordinance and the first day of a payroll period. I can answer any questions you may have.
Do we have any questions at this time? Seeing no questions, I'll move to public comment.
Mr. Mayor, there's no public comment in person.
Close public comment at this time and ask for any final commentary from council members or entertain a motion. Councilmember Aguilar, please.
I'd like to move item 13A.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
To second it.
A motion by Councilmember Aguilar to move item 13A and a second by Councilmember Azevedo. Please vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 601 with Councilmember Simon absent.
At this point in time, we'll move to item 13B. Director Emily Hung will present this item.
Evening, Mayor and City Council members. So as required by Government Code Section 54953, Section C3, I'm here to provide a verbal summary on the recommendations for salary and benefits paid to the city manager. The action item before you is a resolution to approve Amendment Number 2 to City Manager Francis Robustelli's employment agreement. The City Council recently completed the city manager's annual performance evaluation, and based on a favorable review, proposals were made to amend certain provisions of the employment agreement. These proposals included rolling management incentive pay into the base salary. This is a pay differential that all managers and directors, department heads received in recognition of the nature of their management positions and the excessive hours that are necessary to perform the work. For the city manager, it is currently paid at a rate of 120 hours per year, which is the equivalent to 5.7%. A 10% salary increase is also proposed retroactive to January 1st of 2023. Staff completed a total compensation salary survey of all city managers in comparable agencies, and this proposed increase is to ensure City Manager Robustelli is paid competitively in our labor market. With the management incentive and the 10% increase, the annual salary would be $333,912. Thereafter, the city manager would receive a salary increase of 4% in July of 2024, 4% in July of 2025, and 3% in July 2026. Lastly, it is proposed that the city's matching contribution towards deferred compensation be increased from 2% to 5%. And that summarizes the recommendations.
Your presentation. Are there any questions from council? So I'm going to buzz you in. I'll let you do your action.
I don't have a question. If no one else does, I was just going to move the item.
Oh, we have a motion by Councilmember Blue. Councilmember Aguilar.
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Aguilar on this motion. Just looking around to see if there's any other questions. Seeing no questions. Public comment on this item.
Mr. Mayor, there is no public comment in
There's
person.
public comment at this point in time. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Reynes.
Just that it's well deserved. I'm excited to vote on it.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments at this point in time? Let's take a vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 601 with Councilmember Simon absent.
Item 14, council request to schedule agenda items, please. Seeing none, I'll move to item 15, council member reports. Councilmember Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez. On Wednesday, July 12th, I attended the 1115th meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Alameda County Mosquito Abatement District. We went over a general manager's review and talked about the process and the amount of funds that we spend to implement a process with human resources attorney. We also had a presentation and there were there were conversations about Aedes aegypti, which are invasive, and those are mosquitoes that basically are ankle biters during the day, very aggressive. So make sure to wear your mosquito bug spray. And due to the recent rains, there are still folks that there are ponds and lakes and buckets of water that still have mosquitoes. To make sure that you're tipping over any empty buckets of water to help prevent the spread of diseases and prevention of mosquitoes mating. But there, I also have no West Nile virus to report. So that concludes my report.
Seeing no others, I'll quickly report that I traveled with Eric Engelbart, Deputy City Manager, to Sacramento this past week. It was an excellent meeting with staff representatives of the Assembly, the Speaker, Pro Tem, on the Senate side for the Pro Tem. Also met with our Assembly Member Ortega. Great activity, insight. We promoted our legislative agenda, and we'll have some exciting news coming out of that. I think that's all that I've got. Moving to item 16, is that right? Adjournment. Okay, let the record show that we are adjourned at 9:38.